You do what you do. You do what you do
Okay.
when you do what you do. Be you. Have fun.
We are almost live and
I wonder why
oh
we froze.
yes.
See this?
Okay, cool. We are actually
Yep.
live
I
and in 1 minute 32 seconds.
yep.
You won't just be able to hear our lovely voices, you'll actually be able to see our faces too.
And it's interesting. There's a 19-second difference. It's because I've got the live stream up too.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
uh, Interesting. There's a basically. Let me check it. Yeah, about a 19-second delay, something like that. Which is not bad actually.
Cool. Welcome to Camera Shake Podcast live stream in the house with myself and Steve Brazel. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you, my friend?
I am very well. I can see there's some people watching already. If you are watching, leave us a comment so that we can see where you are, where you're watching from. It'll be super interesting as always. Right, I'm going to lose these spectacles because I don't really need them.
Wait, you
Cool.
don't need them, so why do you wear them?
I need them just for reading. They're really just reading glasses. But given the distance between the screen and me, it's actually fine. I don't really need them. In fact, everything's
Gotcha.
more blurry now than it was before. But yeah, if you're watching, if you've come in to join us on this live stream, which by the way will be much more of a regular occurrence, I think that's the plan anyway. But yeah, drop a comment in the comment box down below if you're watching on YouTube. Be super interesting to see where you're at. Anyway, Steve, welcome to the Camera Shake live stream. We're going to be talking about everything that we're expecting to happen in 2025 when it comes to photography. And of course, we're going to be talking about all the stuff that we've got lined up as well. So there should be some interesting stuff there. But it's been a little while since I've seen you. How have you been?
I've been good, thank you. Well, I should say I've been pretty good. I got food poisoning on Friday, so like bad food poisoning. So it's been 4 or 5 days of recovering from that. But generally, life wise, everything's fantastic, man. How about you?
Oh, I'm actually fine. Was it a bad taco by any chance?
Bad burrito.
No, margarita. I knew it was something like that.
Yeah,
It had to be.
yeah. It was a bad burrito, and it was. I mean, in fairness to this restaurant, which I won't name, because there's no way to prove that it was that restaurant, and I don't want to get sued. Uh, you this could happen at any restaurant. Foodborne illness happens. They do recall of food for things you buy at a grocery store. But yeah, it was a unique experience. There were moments I thought I was dying.
Yeah, food poisoning is no fun. No fun at all.
Yeah, it was bad.
Well, let's talk about some fun things. Now, are you ready for 2025 yet? Or have you not quite
Yeah, I'm ready
finished with
for 20.
2024?
No, I'm pretty well finished with 2024. I don't have any shows lined up right now, and just doing the holiday thing with the family and the shopping and decorating the house and mainly that type of thing. I'm ready for 2025. We're going to see each other in 2025 coming up in February. So
Yeah, so there's some interesting stuff coming up. Obviously, early on, because the first sort of quarter of the year is kind of trade show That's the trade show part of the
Yeah.
of the year. So we've got some interesting stuff coming up. We've got Imaging USA coming up in Dallas, and you're going to be there. I'm going to be there. It's going to be super interesting. Now, I've never actually been to Imaging USA, but I know you have. Why don't you give us like a sort of a grand overview of what to expect at that show this year or next year?
So WPPI, which this year is happening the next month, it's happening in March or is it April? I forget now. I go to WPPI every year, and I have for years because it's in Las Vegas, and I'm 3.5 hours from Vegas, and I'm there often. So I've always gone to WPPI for a long time. I've always wanted to go to Imaging USA, and last year Imaging USA was in Louisville, or I shouldn't say last year, this year, January 2024. It was in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm into whiskey. So that's the Bourbon Trail. So I thought, all right, let's go to Imaging USA. And it was interesting for a couple of reasons. How it's different from WPPI, which is the wedding and portrait photographer conference. Imaging USA is much more of a global photography conference. But the problem was the imaging I went, it's the only time I've gone, being in Louisville was hard to get to. Most people couldn't get nonstop flights to Louisville. So it wasn't as busy as I thought it was going to be. This year it's in Texas, or I should say next year. It's in Texas, and I expect it to be more of a normal imaging. Imaging USA is much more of the general, it's like the photography show that you've got. It's much more of the general photography. Big names are there, big brands are there. The expo floor is really good. So for me, I spend a lot of my days just walking around the expo floors at these things, just hoping to run into people that I know, right? So I go to the Canon booth and I hang out, and I go to the Nikon booth and I hang out, and I walk around and I see what little vendors are there and what they've got selling. And you run into the Peter Hurleys and you run into the Joe McNallys, these stars of photography, and the Scott Kelbys, and get to say hi to people you haven't seen in a long time. If you've never been to a photo conference, I think for your depending on your genre, for your first photo conference, Imaging USA, just outside of Dallas, in February, is a fantastic, first choice for you to go to a conference.
So all the brands, I mean, it's very reminiscent of the photography show over here, I think. Do you have like live stages where there's education going on and all that kind of stuff as well?
Yeah. So, like for example, a Smug Mug, if they're there, I don't know that they will be, but if Smug Mug were there, they'll normally have a little setup where somebody's doing presentations. B&H might have a little setup where people are doing pictures. In fact, I think it's the B&H booth where there's one person who's at every conference that they do working their booth, and there's one guy, and he keeps he's laying on the floor taking pictures of their models, but the aisleway to walk by is like 10 feet, and he's laying across it. It happens every conference I go to. It's always that booth. But yes, you'll have, Peter Hurley's headshot crew is there, and they're doing headshots, and you'll go by, what is it, 17 Hats, or I can't remember the name of it, that is like a management software, a really cool management software. Jeff Cable is a user and does presentations often there. You will probably, like if you had a Boris FX there, or Renee Robin might be doing something. And then the big companies, Canon, Nikon, Sony, they've got their ambassadors on stages doing big lighting presentations. And what's cool, by the way, is probably like the photography show. I've never been to the photography show. Is most of these bigger booths, the big brands, will have small little cubby studios, a couple of them, where you as an attendee can take, you'll have your camera on your shoulder. You can walk up and they'll have models and lighting set up, and you can, capture some of those type shots just as you're walking around. It's a fun day. It's a fun day.
Because for me, I think the most important thing about these kind of shows is not necessarily the gear. Because I think that most people sort of think like, oh, well, you're just going to get dragged into spending lots of money on new gear. But I actually think the real value with these shows is really the education part. No matter what genre you shoot, really, there's always something there for you.
See, that's interesting, and it's part of the reason. So this is going to be so fun. It's part of the reason I like when I started going to WPPI. It's part of the reason I liked going. And I used to do interviews of people at, I don't very much anymore, but interviews of people at WPPI when I went, saying, what do you think of it? What made you come? And everybody goes for something different, right? Some people go because a lot of the gear manufacturers will have show specials. So if you've been wanting that, insert your company here, light, Godox, whatever. I'm not saying Godox is, I don't know Godox. I'm not saying they're going to do any sales, but insert your lighting gear here. You've been wanting that light. They may have a show special on it. That's great. Okay. You're going to get some discounts that don't normally happen. Other people go because they want to do the sessions, not just the sessions that are on the expo floor. So the sessions on the expo, the expo is basically a big, what would you call it? It's kind of like a big shopping mall, right? It's a bunch of vendors set up showing their wares, and to help present their wares to people who don't know, they've got people up there doing demonstrations with a little headset mic on. And as you're walking the aisles, you can hear 3 or 4 of these people speaking. That's one part of it. But what these things do is they have actual classes in big conference rooms with well-known educators teaching you how to do better lighting, or how to do better posing, or how to do better Photoshop editing, or whatever it is. And there's some people who specifically go because they really want to become, amazing at Lightroom, or they're having trouble printing from Lightroom and they want Scott Kelby's class specifically on printing from Lightroom, that type of thing. And then there's people like me. I agree with you that the education that you can get there, should that be something you want or need, is all in one place. Like you can go and learn a ton of stuff in 4 days, 3-4 days. For me, it's the networking, right?
Yeah,
For me, it's
absolutely
getting to see people I haven't seen before or in a long time, people I've had on my show that I've never met in person. People sometimes, because of the social world that we live in today, sometimes it's people I've known for years that I've just never met in person. I consider them friends, right? But I've either never met them in person, or I've met them one time in person, but I know them very, very well. So for me, that's the best part, is the networking side of it. But that's what's cool. You can get whatever you want.
And I agree with you. Personally, for me, it's it's the connection with other humans. That is so valuable. Getting to meet people. Making new friends. I've made so many friends at the photography show over the last 3 or 4 years. It's insane. And of course, purely from a podcast point of view, it's incredible because you meet so many people, and somebody introduces you to somebody else. And of course, for me, the highest value is what happens after the show. So in London, guessing it won't be any different with imaging, but with the UK show, usually the show finishes at 5, but then everybody goes to the bar, or you go out for dinner or whatever.
Yep.
And that's the perfect opportunity to get to know people, get to know new people, network and that sort of thing. And it's really in a very relaxed atmosphere, and I found that incredibly fun. And and of course valuable, in terms of the podcast. And I always create an episode at the show, and I'm planning on doing the same thing at imaging, of course, just to give the Camera Shake audience really an overview of what's happening at the show, and get to meet some of the people that attend the show, and get an overview over maybe some of the new gear and the new equipment that's out, and that's sort of shaking things up at that time.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because when we were at imaging in January in Louisville, Kentucky, my wife went with me, and she's going with me this time to imaging too. And you've met Deb before, but there were some social gatherings that you can't recreate, right? Yeah. Even if you try. So yeah. David Bergman, Canon Explorer of Light, concert tour photographer extraordinaire, Bon Jovi photographer, Luke Combs photographer, excuse me, Sports Illustrated news history, you know, behind him. Uh, Amazing guy, right? Well, he had a bunch of he does concert workshops, or he used to do concert workshops called Shoot from the Pit at Luke Combs concerts. And there were a whole bunch of his students, people who had attended his workshop in imaging. So he decided, because he's got the mailing list, he decided to say, hey, if you're at imaging and you're in Shoot from the Pit, let's all get together for dinner. So he arranged that, and we all sat down and had dinner together and made some new friends that I'd never met before. Some of them weren't at the workshop I was at, because I did David's workshop. It's an amazing workshop. And then another one was, David's a friend of mine. So there was a point where we were trying to figure out, after that dinner, we said, let's go get a drink somewhere. So we're walking around looking to grab a drink. And I said, we've been in that bar across the street before, because we had been there early scouting for a photo workshop we were going to do there with Freddie Clark. And we walk into this place, and it happens to be the bar where Canon and a bunch of Explorers of Light were doing after dinner drinks on the last night of the workshop of the conference. And most of them, David knows all of them, and I knew a bunch of them because a bunch of them have been on my show. And so we sit down and we start having drinks with all of these guys and gals, and just had, these impromptu conversations that don't happen. The most in-depth conversation I've probably ever had with Scott Kelby was at a Photoshop World once in Las Vegas, Mandalay Bay. Everybody went to the bar after the conference, and Scott was in there. It was like the first night of the conference, and Scott's in there, and we saw each other and we start talking. And that was probably the longest I've actually had face-to-face in person with Scott. And I've known him for years. That's the reason to me to go to these things. Now, don't misunderstand me. If you want to be a photographer that uses, lighting, artificial lighting, and you want to better understand how to light a white background, or how to pose somebody, or, how to, some tips and tricks for getting the best headshot, or whatever it is, right? If you want to understand either the technical or post-processing or business side of what you do and make it a living for yourself and get better at it, that's all there, right? Take all those classes, but don't snooze on the networking side, because the networking side is connections you'll make for life, and it will make every subsequent conference you go to better, because now it's, hey, there's Kirsten again, right? It changes the conference, totally changes the conference.
Yeah, that's true. It's really I find it, especially with the photography show, it's one of these annual events that I really look forward to so much, just because I get to meet a lot of friends again, and it's over the years, I think some of the friendships have really grown, and have become really quite close. So it's really fun. To the point where sometimes people play some like tricks on you. Like last year, for example, I was speaking on one of the stages, and Dave Clayton, who organizes that stage, I don't know. I'm pretty sure he did it on purpose, but he made sure that I would go on directly after Scott Kelby on both days. I'm like, okay, thanks, thanks for that. But again, it was a great opportunity, because I mean, obviously I knew of Scott, but I'd never really spoken to him. I never really met him in person. We ended up going out for dinner afterwards. It was really a really nice time at the show.
He's such a nice guy.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So it's exactly, I always say to people, don't go home at 5 o'clock, like when the show stops.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Just, the day only just gets started at that point. That's the thing.
And it's funny, I didn't know Dave Clayton was involved with the photography show. I wish he would, bring his podcast back, man. I miss him and Alan doing stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't ever want to have to follow Scott Kelby, because I remember one time I was at I think it was WPPI, and he was doing, I think it was printing in Lightroom or something like that. And I'd known him for a while. I went in basically just to say hi. And I found myself, I think it might have been the first time I saw him teach live. Like I'd seen him do keynotes live, and of course, he's done stuff online forever.
Hmm.
And I went up to him afterwards and I said, I just got to tell you, you are born to do this, right? There's certain people that you put them on a stage in an educational environment and it's what they are intended to do by design. And that is Kelby. It's the other one is Joe McNally is another one of those.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, for example, we were in London not long ago, last year. We were doing a full UK type tour. We spent the day with Dave Williams and you walking around, both of you giving us this amazing tour of London, Dave sharing knowledge that only Dave Williams would know about London.
Yeah, Dave
And-
Dave Williams, former Metropolitan Police officer, would know. It's a very interesting tour, very
gosh.
different.
It was so good. And then we went and had a beer afterwards, and you're going to be in Dallas for imaging. So I'm super excited because I'm going to get to see you again. I'm going to get to see, Dr. T from Platypod. It changes what you're going for. Doesn't mean you
absolutely.
don't get the educational side. You don't get the deals, if there are any deals. You don't get the, exposure and fun, or to see a city maybe you haven't seen before. It just changes everything because now it's hanging out, right? It's hanging out with friends, which is awesome.
Exactly. So, if you're watching this and you're over in the States, you're trying to, make an effort and get to Imaging USA. But if you are in the UK, and you want to have a similar, if not the same experience over here in the UK, make sure you go to the photography show at the beginning of March in London this time. So in the past, the photography show has always been at the NEC in Birmingham, but this time it's in London at the Excel Conference Center, and it's going to be amazing. From what I've heard, it is really going to be a treat. Now, I'm saying this, and since I'll be speaking at the photography show, in actual fact, I have a little discount code. So if you use the code SPK25, which the nice people from the photography show have given to me, then you can get 20% off of your tickets, which is flipping phenomenal. I mean, amazing. So, make sure you use that code SPK25. I'll put it on the Camera Shake channel as well and stuff like that, so you can take advantage. So if you are in the UK, or if you're thinking about traveling to the UK specifically for the photography and video show, which, by the way, is the biggest show of that type in the whole of Europe now, it is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be lots of opportunities, obviously lots of great deals on gear, lots of amazing stuff on the stages in terms of education, and, as we've just been discussing, a phenomenal opportunity to meet loads of other photographers. And I've seen some of the speaker lineup this year, and I have to say there's some incredible names on that lineup. One Mr. Scott Kelby is going to be there again. I haven't seen the actual running order. I wonder whether they've put him on right before me again. That'd be annoying. He's such a hard.
They should make him follow you now. He should have to follow you.
The thing is, I thought, man, he's such a hard act to follow, and then somebody, I think it was Dave Williams, he went well, just look at him as your warm-up act. I'm like, okay. So yeah, it was fun though. It was really fun. He did a really awesome thing on the, it was on the editing and post-production stage. So yeah, if you have a chance to catch some of his talks, definitely don't miss it. But there's so many awesome people there this year. If you are in the UK again, or if you're planning on traveling to the UK, it's well worth it. If you got a few days, the beginning of March, you want to take them as a vacation, come to the UK, hit up the photography show at the Excel in London, and you won't regret it. It's the 8th to the 11th of March in London this time. And, once you're in London, it's always a great city to visit anyhow. So, there you go. Anyway.
And then you've got the people like Kelby, you've got the people like Kirsten, you've got the people like Dave Williams, Christy Goodwin. I don't know if she's still speaking at it regularly, but she's spoken at it before.
She's going to be there again.
House photographer.
I think.
Is she going to be speaking again?
Yeah, I think I saw Christy on the program. Yeah, she should be on. So that'd be good.
Christy is one of my favorite photographers of all time. She's the house photographer at Royal Albert Hall, and just a brilliant photographer with what she does, and a wonderful human being too. Has a new book out, by the way. not on photography, but a book. So yeah, that's a show someday I'd like to go to. In my case, I'd have to, travel overseas to do it, which adds a little bit of a barrier, but doesn't mean it's impossible.
Yeah, it's totally worth it. I mean, this is exactly why I said, I mean, I was toying with the idea last year, and then for a variety of reasons, in particular, my wife's health didn't really play ball at that point. I couldn't make it happen. But so I said this year is going to happen, 2025, or actually, well, next year, 2025 is going to happen. Also, I've never been to Dallas before, so that's interesting. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to the one state that's just flat and has nothing really to see, like mountains or anything. But yeah, I mean, it's there. It's a state that exists. Yes. Now all
Just
the
like the
Texas
UK.
people are going to be mad at me.
It's just like the UK,
Yeah,
really flat,
no, that's not true. Yeah, it's not quite the same. But yeah, it's so that's the big thing for me in 2025 is I'll be doing, and there's more than just that. Again, we've got NAB, which is the National Association of Broadcasters, that happens in, is it April of this year? You've got NAMM, which happens in January, which is a musician workshop or conference. You've got Imaging USA in February. You've got WPPI in either March or April. That's always in Las Vegas. So between January and April, tons of conferences to go through. And what I would say to some people is if you've ever thought about going on a workshop with a photographer, like there's a photographer you really want to go do a workshop with, whatever it is. Like I mentioned, Bergman's Shoot from the Pit. Joe McNally did one at Ellis Island that I really wanted to go to. That would have been awesome. But you've never done one. The nice things about these conferences, I don't know if the photography show does this. Like at WPPI, they have pre-show workshops, pre-conference workshops, where it's not part of your admission. You pay extra, but some of the speakers do workshops there. They'll take you around the hotel that you're in with a bride and groom model, and you'll photograph that bride and groom. There are lots of things that you can do workshop-wise all in one place. And over 4 days, you could do a bunch of them. That will get you an idea of a couple of things to me that I don't think people put weight on enough. When you're doing a workshop, yes, you're going to pick a workshop based on the genre you're shooting, what you want to learn, what the content is. But different instructors are different, right? You need to learn what type of instruction works for you. Are you a verbal learner? Are you a visual learner? Are you a tactile learner? Does that instructor tend to do everything on a PowerPoint presentation first and then say, go, shoot? Or are they out there holding your hand while you're shooting? And which one works better for you? And you can find out if you go to these things, what fits your learning style. And then later, if you just want to go to somebody's workshop, you know what you're looking for.
So it's very similar at the photography show in London. Actually, the workshops happen not before the shows; they're not like pre-show workshops, but they happen during the show. So there's a lot of education that just comes as part and parcel of your ticket price. There's tons of stuff. I mean, I don't even know how many stages, 10 stages or something. It's a lot of stuff. Anything you can possibly imagine. It's a live shooting stage where you can watch photographers doing live shoots. It may be a wedding shoot. It might be a portrait shoot. It might be a headshot. Whatever it may be. In fact, I'm going to be doing something fun on the live shooting stage. And then you have other stages like the editing and post-production stage where people will talk about editing, maybe editing in Lightroom, editing Photoshop, using whatever Luminar or whatever it may be. Talk about portrait editing. In fact, I'm also doing something on the editing stage. In actual fact, I'm going to do like a two-parter where I'm doing a shoot on the live shooting stage, and then I'm going to go to the editing stage, and I'm going to take you through the full edit of that shoot. So the idea is you can be able to learn everything about this shoot from the very start to the very end, the final image. So I'm going to take you through the whole thing across 2 stages. So that will be a super fun thing to do. So yeah, so we're
That's a
doing stuff
great
like
way
that.
to do it. That's I don't think I've ever seen that done at a workshop before, at a
Yeah, so
conference before.
I used to I've done this sort of thing before. I'm gonna show people how I shoot my 3 heads in a row images, and we're gonna talk about
Oh,
the lighting. We're gonna talk about communicating with the model. We're talking about making somebody feel comfortable, and we're gonna talk about how to get really great facial expressions out of somebody. And we could talk about all the technical bits that go into the actual shoot, but then we're also going to go into the actual edit and how to get that look and really how to bring it to that finished image. So because I think with something like that, I think it's important to really look at the whole process, but it's it's just easier when you break it down like that, I think. So it'd be a great opportunity. So people who are interested in the shooting side can join the shooting part of it on the live shooting stage. And people who are just interested in this sort of style of editing, portrait editing, can maybe just come to the editing stage. But if you want to know how to do the whole thing, how to really get it from setting up the lights to the finished photo at the end, then come and join both, because it'll be super fun. And these kind of shoots are fun. It's like they're not your regular headshot shoot or something. This is all about getting somebody to make some really weird, grimaced faces, basically. So it's it is going to be a lot of fun. But so you've
yeah.
got that.
If you haven't seen Kirsten's three heads in a row, go look it up on Instagram. It's at 3 heads in a row, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So it's
Spelled
three as in
out,
T.
though. It's not the number 3. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's spelled out. So go and check it out. Give it a follow, because it's a small account, but it'll be fun. Anyway, so there's that kind of stuff going on. There are also masterclasses, and so for some of the masterclasses, you have to buy them extra. And there's some special masterclass stages, for instance, where there's other stuff happening. There might be, I know Joe McNally has done masterclasses there before. Lots of really big names in the industry have been there before. So that's cool. Then of course you've got lots of stages that are linked to some of the manufacturers. So Canon and Nikon always have their own stages going on where there's stuff. There's always Fuji always do stuff. What else? I mean, there's lots of, and also what they've added for the first time this year is a creator section. So there are stages that specifically focus on video creation, maybe social media creation, that kind of stuff. So this is a whole new part that's now going to be part of the show, I think, every year, which is a clever move, to be honest, because a lot of people who are using photography, for the lack of a better word, are actually in that realm, and so there's going to be a lot of learning opportunities when it comes to that kind of stuff there as well. So whether it's photo, whether it's video.
That's one of my things with imaging. I'm curious if imaging is going to have that, because it is imaging. It's more general, more generic. And of course, every camera that comes out nowadays is being reviewed by those, review channels that we all know, Petapixel with Chris and I'm like, why is my mind going blank? My mind just went blank. Chris Nichols and who am I thinking of? Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for this one. It'll hit me. Anyway, but people like that are always reviewing. Jordan Dre.
Yeah.
So, you got Chris doing the photo side, the still side, and Jordan doing the video side, because they're not just doing it because the gear has video capabilities. They're doing it because there is a market of people that won't buy that gear if it doesn't have the right video capabilities, right? If it doesn't have log, or if it's got the wrong log, or if it doesn't shoot the right frame rate, or whatever it is. So I think, as you started this by, what are we looking for in 2025? If these conferences don't expand to creators, to hybrid shooters, to wedding shooters that are shooting video and still, to concert tour photographers that are doing backstage portraits, but also having to do, TikTok reels turned around by the next morning so the band can post them, right? If you're not focusing on, how to mount an 360 X4 on top of your cold shoe so that you can get 360 point of view behind the scenes, you're missing out on something. And I think that's not good for your conference. I think if you run a conference right now and you're not actively thinking where is this industry moving, and you're missing the content creator side, you're messing up badly.
You're absolutely right. I think the hybrid shooting concept is something that is only set to grow. You know, you've been able to tell for over the last like 5, 6, 7 years. You know, most mirrorless well, pretty much all mirrorless cameras now have phenomenal video capabilities. You know, iPhones or smartphones in general are incredible machines when it comes to, you know, video production.
Yep.
And so, you know, I think it's going to be so embedded that I'm pretty sure it's not going to take long, but for the vast majority of people, there won't really be that hard line between photo and video anymore. It's just something that, you know, especially when you look at the way we use that kind of these kind of media on social media as well. You know, there isn't really going to be much of a distinction between stills and video. I mean, I can definitely say that for me, there really isn't very much of a distinction. I just operate in both of those, you know, formats basically constantly. And but I do have to say that if you're a stills photographer and you want to get into video, it is a steep learning curve. There's a lot of stuff to learn about frame rates and logs and yada, yada, yada. And then there's audio, which is, of course, the thing that we can, as stills photographers, we can totally ignore audio because it's not relevant. But the minute you get into video, audio all of a sudden becomes a thing. And that's a whole new thing to learn, you know. And so my hope is, and this is really something I'm interested in, of course, you know, I'm interested to see at the photography show, is how important the audio part is going to play, because personally I think audio is immensely important, you know, when you're getting into video. And so I'm curious to see what's on offer in that respect.
It's funny because I agree with you completely. To me, I'm really, again, I'm a radio guy. I'm an old radio guy. Audio to me is 80% of any video that I watch. And that's probably even being generous. If I go to a show where the video quality is subpar, I'm not saying horrible. I mean, if you can't watch it, you can't watch it, right? But if the video quality is subpar and the audio is good, I'll suffer through that subpar video if it's content I care about. If, however, I'm looking at a 4K video, which happens on YouTube all the time and it drives me nuts. If I'm watching a beautiful 4K video and they're lit well and the recording is well and they did some post-production well, they put in lower thirds and they put in some B-roll and blah, 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 and they're using a shotgun mic on a camera that's 15 feet away and they sound like they're in a can because there's no soundproofing in the room, and it's ear fatiguing to me. I don't care what the content is. I can't take it. Now, Clearly, I may be the only one because some of those channels have, 60,000, 100,000 subscribers. But I agree with your premise that audio is critical. And it is going to be interesting because when you talk Imaging USA, that's not photography, right? Imaging is imaging. That can be motion as well. It'll be interesting for me to see if there is a movement towards an all-encompassing expo floor that has the new little Shure mics or the DJI mics or the Rode mics or something like that for, I guarantee you're going to see a DJI Ronin at the B&H booth. So it's going to be interesting to see if they make that pivot properly. And here's my prediction. If these conferences don't pivot to the hybrid shooters, they're not long for this world.
Yeah, so I fully agree. You know, we've seen this with a number of different conferences, you know, around the world, especially here in Europe as well, you know, that have been long-standing conferences and then all of a sudden have disappeared. You know, especially during Photokina is a really good example. So Photokina used to be the biggest show of that type in in Europe, possibly in the world, I'm not sure, but it was massive. It was held in Cologne in Germany every other year, and it was a great, again, one of these events where people would travel to internationally. In fact, the Fro was there some years ago, when it was still running, I remember. But it was just getting too difficult to put the show on, because of that downturn in the photography industry in terms of point and shoot cameras and all that kind of stuff. It became not viable anymore to put that show on, and that's ultimately why they had to cancel it. But here's the thing I read recently, because I'm interested in, again, we're talking about what to expect in 2025 and what are the trends, and we've seen in many different areas, we've seen a trend back to maybe more traditional forms of, technology. In the audio sector, we've seen the resurgence of vinyl, for example, and recently tapes, like cassette tapes. What's up with that? I don't know. But so there's been this
I have to interject on that.
Right.
I understand. Look, if you're younger than me and you're attracted to buying a vinyl collection and a turntable, right on. I have a fairly large vinyl collection. If, however, your mentality is I want to go back to cassettes, seek help. Unless you've got a pencil with an eraser and you plan on doing this to one of the reels on a regular basis to tighten it up. There's nothing about a cassette that you need, want, or care about.
Tell me one thing, because I remember a technology called 8-tracks, particularly in conjunction with car stereos, right? Now, to the best of my knowledge, that was never a thing over here in Europe. And even when I lived for a short while in the US, I didn't see any of those, but they were all actually, to be honest, most cars had CD stereos at the time. But what were 8-tracks?
So I grew up, I'm old, all right. So I grew up with 8-tracks. I literally, the first 8-track I ever wore out was Aerosmith Toys in the Attic, I think. 8-tracks are if you've ever been into a radio station back in the day, we're all digital in radio now, but back in the day, radio stations had something called carts, which were, I actually probably have one around here somewhere. In fact, I know I do out in the other room. 8-tracks are fairly large square boxes, and they operate on a different principle in that the tape is moving, there's a circle in the middle, and when you stick it into the device, inside the cartridge, a capstan wheel would come up behind the tape to roll the tape, and that would roll it across the tape head. The nice thing about 8-tracks were they worked really well and consistently, and at least in my experience, didn't get eaten often. The problem with tape is that you're always going to have tape get eaten.
Yeah.
Because you end up with gunk. The idea of tape is they're magnetic particles. You apply a charge, they flip certain ways, positive, negative, to create a signal that you have. And as it runs across a tape heads have, they're metal, and they have little pieces in them that have edges, and those edges periodically will wear the tape down. And you end up with buildup on the tape head. And so periodically things get stuck, and you end up with a tape being eaten. With cassettes, the tape is much thinner, much smaller, and they constantly get eaten. 8-tracks actually were not bad to me fidelity-wise. I didn't mind an 8-track. Same as a cart and a radio, which we've used for decades and decades. Some radio stations still use carts. We still have cart machines in the studio I'm in right now. We rarely use it, but we have them. Cassettes are just not there quality-wise. Vinyl, on the other hand, I get. I'm a huge proponent of high-quality vinyl. A lot of my collection is what's called virgin vinyl, because a lot of records back in the day were made from melted down vinyl. They, print it, etch it. When it's fresh vinyl that hasn't been recycled, for lack of a better phrase, you get cleaner, better grooves in it. I'm a big proponent of vinyl sounding probably the best. I get it. Cassettes, though, no. But it's interesting because as you're talking about, looking forward to 2025, you made a comment about phones being so good at video and photo now, and that's killed the point and shoot market. And that's the interesting thing looking forward to 2025 and beyond to me was we see the trend. Like the trend is not deniable. Okay. We've known since the iPhone came out in 2008 and instantly Flickr, which was this huge site for photography, and instantly the number one camera being posted to Flickr was an iPhone, right? We've seen where it's going. As phones have improved in sensor quality while still small and not competing with a quote unquote traditional style camera, real camera, the combination of better sensors, better light capturing, computational photography done in the phone better and better each and every time, post-processing happening automatically with a magic wand, right? The combination of those things has eroded the point and shoot market to the point where your phone is your point and shoot. Okay, we all get that. The problem is the phones have whatever it is, iPhone, Android, whatever, top of the line phone, Pixel. Phones have also now become your camcorder that back in the day you held on your shoulder and then you held in your hand. But now they are increasing what frame rate they can do, 120 frames a second for slow motion. Some of them, 4K or 8K. I can do 8K on an Insta360 now. Granted, it's 8K in a full circle, so it's not really 8K what you're seeing, but you get the point. The fact that we can capture all of that on a phone now makes it to where many things are being shot on a phone. Now, it's not being shot just in a handheld phone, but Apple shoots a lot of their stuff on iPhones with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of, gaffer gear.
And
but
lenses. Nobody tells you that.
And lenses and all that. Yeah. But my point being this, we are at a point now where, the Osmo Pocket takes amazing video in the right light. You're not going to use an iPhone to do NFL sports. You're not going to use an iPhone at the Olympics. You're not going to use an iPhone to shoot a concert properly. But for social media, TikTok turnarounds or Instagram stories, to walk up to a drummer and film him as he's playing, right? Or post a GoPro or an Insta360 on his cymbal stand, what you can do now with small sensors, assuming the light is there to capture it, changes the landscape. So where's actual photography going? When I say actual photography, I think all of that is actual photography. Actual cameras, right? What's going to happen to the Nikons and the Sonys and the Fujis and the Canons? And here's my thing. We are a long way away from an iPhone or some mobile small censored device being able to be used by AP or a wire service for the Olympics, for the NFL, for Sports Illustrated stuff. We're a long way away from replacing real photography in those extreme areas. And that's why I always look at people who review the R1, the new Canon R1, and go, yeah, it's a little too specific of a sports camera. Or is that forward thinking, right? Is the reason the top of the line Canon, people diss it a little bit as not being all around enough and being a very specific sports camera, is that Canon, rightly or wrongly, predicting where the market's going to go and saying, we're not going to need down the road a lot of $6,000 camera bodies that do a little bit of everything, because we need to start focusing on what's the niche that's going to be left behind. What's the vinyl record of photography? And the vinyl record of photography may be action. The thing you can't get a fast enough shutter in low light for on a mobile device. Long diatribe, I apologize.
And, and I fully agree with you, but there's one thing one little thing that I read that made me stop and think a little bit, because apparently it turns out that major manufacturers like Canon, Sony, and Nikon are anticipated to bring back the point and shoot camera. And I think the idea, right? So the idea, good question, but the idea is, they're sort of expected to be point and shoot cameras with zoom lenses under $1,000. right, in that kind of price segment. And I think the idea is to aim that at enthusiasts that seek simplicity and portability. And so my thinking, I thought about this and I kind of thought, well, so, the one issue, as much as I appreciate my iPhone being able to do everything, okay, and I do use it, sometimes I do use it to film some stuff. Obviously, I use it as a camera all the time. The problem with it is, though, is that, let's say I'm filming something. So whilst I'm filming, I'm getting emails and messages and stuff happening constantly. And then I have to use it to send, another message back, or I have to, and it's like, it becomes this thing that just, it just does too many things. And I can see how maybe, just like in the world of music, people go, well, I love vinyls because of the simplicity. That thing does nothing other than just play music, and I need a record player, and the record player only does this one thing. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't do Bluetooth, and it doesn't do this and that and whatever else. It doesn't read out emails or, whatever. It just plays records. And so I can see how just like there has been this trend towards film photography over the last, few years, which, in comparison to digital photography is a real pain in the ass, really, because of the whole process and all that fuffle that you have to go through. But it's also beautifully cathartic. And to me, it's because I got into film photography in a slightly more serious manner, over the last year or last year and a half or something. I have to say, to me, it's a little bit like meditation. And what it does do is takes me away from the everyday grind. It just gives me a new way, in a sense, to enjoy photography, and yeah, it's completely different. There's no autofocus. Everything's super slow, everything takes absolutely flipping forever, at the shooting stage. But then, of course, you got to develop the whole thing, and then you've got to scan it and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff, until you actually have the final image. But in a weird way, I think you treasure these images a lot more than the 10,000 images or whatever I have on my iPhone, And so I think in a world where everything's gone super high-tech and super digital, there may just be a large enough segment in the population that really enjoys that little bit of analog simplicity,
Right.
And that's, those are the people that get into vinyl, those are the people that, enjoy film photography. And, those are the people who basically have, a field diary or something, and they write stuff by hand rather than using the notes app on their phone or whatever else, and
sketch out their lighting or whatever it is.
Yeah. I used to do this actually during the pandemic. I started doing this. I haven't really done it for a little while, but it was a pretty good thing. I really went sort of back to basics in the pandemic. And what I did was what was it called? I kept a bullet diary. And so what it was is basically I got this old field diary, like a leather thing, and with empty pages in it. And every week I drew out little boxes for each day of the week. And then I drew out a little calendar for the month. And I did it all in with what do you call it? Like an ink pen, right? And it would take me quite some time. And every morning, the first thing I would do is I'd get up, I grab a coffee, I sit down, and I basically work out and write down all the things that I've got to do on that day. And then on a Sunday night, I would basically look ahead for the week, and I would by hand write it all the things that I've got coming up in that week. And then, I would then take the things that I didn't manage to do the previous week, and then again by hand, I copied them all over into the following week. And it's sort of, in this day and age, it seems like a ridiculous thing to do because you can just copy and paste, or you have apps to do all that for you, or you use notes or whatever it is, But there was something to it that really grounded my brain or my mind just that first thing in the morning. And I found that, you know, in that time when everything was going crazy and like everything, you know, viruses and vaccinations and crazy schools shut and everybody's going nuts, you know, I found this was the one thing that kind of brought me back down and centered me in a sense, and brought me back down to that you know, that base level, you know, ground zero, and then I could attack the day, you know, with a completely different mindset, in a very weird way. And I'm really not. I'm usually not that kind of guy. I'm like, give me the tech, you know. But so I can understand how in this world of AI and crazy technology and social media this and social media that, and you know, and the Russians and the Chinese, and like this constant fear of like everybody listening to everything you say and do, and everybody's watching you left, right, and center. You know, I can understand how, you know, a lot of people might think, well, actually, I just want to go back to basics, you know.
Okay, so counterpoint then. And I'm not
Okay.
saying I disagree with you.
No, go for
But
it.
as you're saying that, a thought struck my mind that I don't think I'd ever thought of before. Because I think the same way, right? Analog, so many people today are like, analog's old, you're old if you got to use analog, you got to move forward. Why are you using, you know, why are you handwriting a ledger when you can use Excel, right? Excuse me. But a thought struck me as you were talking. And that is, when somebody goes analog, is it the tactile analog old school? My brain, it draws your focus differently, right? You have to focus on, you know, no pun intended. You have to focus on things differently. It's manual focus, whatever it is. Or possibly is what's causing all of that is I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for, finite nature of it. Meaning digital music, I just play it and play it and play it, and I record it in a computer and whatever. An album, meaning vinyl, if I drop the needle wrong and I scratch the record, I've screwed up the record. If I'm shooting with film, there is no spray and pray, right? It's a finite thing.
Yeah, he is
So
very.
if you jump in the air and I miss that jump because I was manually focusing, right? So I guess the way I would word it is it the fact that it's analog and it slows you down and it takes time and all of that? Or is it I get one shot and if I don't get it, I'm screwed up? And is it that challenge of it? And if it's the second one, if it's the challenge of I had 32 exposures or 16 exposures and that was it, and then whatever's happening in front of me, I'm going to miss while I change film. I would argue you can recreate that with technology, right? You can put a manual focus lens on a digital body. You can shoot in manual and stop using auto ISO. You can put a lens on your body that you would not normally use in that scenario and challenge yourself that way. You can shoot a subject matter that's finite. Now, I'm not going to go shoot weddings, but let's face it, if you shoot a wedding and you don't get the shots, you can't recreate the wedding and the bride and groom are going to sue you, right? You can apply that same type of pressure to yourself without the hassle of analog. I think most people do analog because I don't think it has anything to do with any of the other stuff. I think most people do analog from a hobbyist type nature of, I just want to get my hands dirty. I want to dig in the dirt and plant the seeds. And I know I can do it, and I know I can challenge myself. I don't think it's more challenging. I don't think it's more time. You can apply challenges to yourself in all of the tech. Not the same challenges, granted. But you're not going to get the exact same look. I don't care what your preset is. It's never going to look the same as film. So I think we have to be fair to the tech and say part of it is just there is an aesthetic and a gut feeling that we get from using these old technologies. And we just do it for that. And all the other stuff, we're fluffing it to explain it to ourselves. But the truth is we're just doing it because why not? Right?
Yeah.
Why not? I would love to have an 8mm projector and show my dad's nose camera films from his P-51
Hmm.
in Korea. I've got the film digitized, but God, it would be kind of cool to hear it go grrr as it's
Yeah.
playing the film. I think some of it is nostalgia and just why not?
Yeah, absolutely. It's nostalgia. It's also, I think, with especially with photographers who've sort of grown up in the digital age, it's sometimes maybe it's a little bit of like, I want to prove to myself that I can actually do that, you know, because I think one of the things that I've realized is that, you might think you're a pretty decent photographer in the digital world, but then when it comes to actually shooting stuff, on film, that's what separates the, I don't know what the saying is, like the chaff from the whatever the other bit is, that one basically. It's an interesting thing. It's hard, it's a lot more involved, for a number of reasons. You can't check your image straight away. You have to wait. It's a completely different thing. It's of course completely counterintuitive to this immediate satisfaction type of society that we live in nowadays. It's just the complete opposite, and maybe that's the attraction. Anyway, I found this thing about point and shoot cameras really quite interesting, because I can understand this sort of resurgence of film. We've seen this over the last few years, the comeback of that. But point and shoots, I didn't really think that was going to be a thing, but apparently it could be. That'd be interesting.
So this is an interest to me. One of my problems with, as we're looking forward, I'm often reminded of when Steve Jobs came back to Apple. And one of his things was, we have way too many SKUs and it's confusing. And one of my problems with the Nikons of the world and the Sonys of the world and the Canons of the world, specifically Nikon and Canon, is my God, they've got a lot of cameras. And do they really need that many? Right? I mean, do they really, really need that many SKUs? I would argue no. Like if I right now, here's a perfect example. I'm using an old Canon 5D Mark IV with a 24-70 EF 24-70 for my webcam. If I wanted to upgrade that to 4K, because this camera's not doing 4K. If I wanted to upgrade that to 4K, I got a lot of options, right? I have a lot of friends who use Sonys. I have a lot of friends who use Panasonics. And in the Canon line, there's a couple of ones that I could go to. But I would argue there's almost too many, right? I could do an R6 or an R5. That's overkill. I could do one of the smaller Canons that have interchangeable, lenses. But there's like 3 or 4 for me to pick from, right? There's so much overlap in some of these bodies now that I actually, what I would like to see moving forward in 2025 and beyond is I'd like to see the camera companies not throw stuff against the wall and see if it sticks. I'd like to see them buckle down and literally say to themselves, if we really wanted to streamline our product line so that we had pro, semi-pro, aspiring pro, and amateur, and family. 5 bodies. That's all you really need for real mirrorless bodies. And then you throw in a dedicated camera for a content creator. Maybe a dedicated camera for a home studio to compete with the Logitech webcams, but also the OBSBots, right? So you give them a camera that you can take out in the field and do stuff with, but also mount behind an Elgato teleprompter. That's all you need. That list, I listed 7 bodies. That's all you need, and each one would have a definitive space. I would love to see camera companies refine their vision. And I almost feel like at times they're about to do it, and then you say that they're bringing point and shoots back, and I wonder to myself if there's a CEO that's going, look, I know these are all going to die. I just can't let it die on my watch.
Yeah,
Right?
possibly.
I can't be the one that goes point and shoots are dead and be wrong. And
Yeah.
I wish that they would be a little more towards that Steve Jobs mentality of we're doing away with the CD drive. When everybody went, you're an idiot, don't do it. And then everybody did away with the CD drive. We're killing Flash. We're not going to allow Flash on our phones. And then Flash died. We're doing away with, headphone jacks. Okay, you don't get them all right, but
Yeah.
but you try, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to see camera companies do that because part of me thinks the GoPros, the Sony action cams, the DJI action cams, the Insta360s, in the long run, are gonna eat their lunch.
Yeah, so the Osmo, for instance, it really floored me. I checked that out the other day, and it's like, well, this thing is, I'm actually thinking
Which
about
one?
the DJI Osmo 3
The
or whatever
Pocket?
it is. Yeah, the Pocket.
Oh, yeah.
exactly, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, because I'm actually thinking, I'm realistic. I'm thinking of rather than, bringing my camera and a gimbal and all that, all that kind of stuff. I'm actually just thinking of getting one of those and bringing that to imaging and making a whole episode on that because it's completely doable.
Well, I'm muted.
Oh.
Sorry. You could do it on your phone though, because you could get a MagSafe mount, carry a small monopod with you that folds up small, monopod that has feet. That's what I have. And I've done that before where I just carry the monopod around. On top of the monopod is, I don't know if I can reach it with my headphones on. There we go. On top of the monopod, now in my case, it's on top of my Plataball Elite, but this is from Moment and it's a MagSafe mount. And my phone can just mount on there. And you just set up the monopod and you clip your phone on it. And it has a cold shoe and you could put a light on it, which is the nice thing because the problem with the Osmo is getting lighting and all of that. And that's, we were talking about audio. You get a Rode just announced the Rode Go 3 like yesterday, which is now going to have, it did not before, the DJI did, but the Rode did not, internal recording. They call it backup recording. But to me, why have a transmitter recorded into your phone? Clip a mic on you, clip a mic on me. They record internally 32-bit float. You're done.
So here's the thing. Have you tried out the Shure Move mic? So Shure brought
I have
out.
not tried the Shure Move mic. What I like about it, I've seen it, is how small it is. Because the problem with and other companies have them now too. I think DJI just came out with the DJI Mini or whatever it's called. The bigger Rode mics, first of all, okay, I have to do this right. Rode. If anybody from Rode is watching this or listening to this, do you not understand your clientele? Read the room. Okay. We don't want something on our shirt that says Rode, DJI, right? If you want to put it small in a corner, I won't begrudge you that. But we bought the product. We didn't buy a billboard for your company. And when I clip this big black thing on that's shiny and reflects in a camera and has giant word Rode on it, that's offensive to me. I paid for the product. I don't want to advertise your company. Just like when I buy a car and the license plate frame says, the car dealer, first thing to come off. I paid tens of thousands of dollars for a car. I'm not advertising your dealership. That's not what I'm there for. If these companies would release something that was just plain, and the nice thing is for that Shure, it's so small it doesn't pull, it doesn't tug your shirt down.
Yeah, it's tiny.
But
Another
it
thing
doesn't
that
do 32-bit float.
What it does do is it automatically connects to your phone via Bluetooth. So now you don't have to sync the audio anymore because you can record it straight into your phone.
So here's the thing. I have an original Rode Go, which I loved, and I had nightmares with it in Vegas at WPPI. Why? Because you're on a conference room floor with
Yeah.
tons of interference.
Yeah.
Bluetooth will die naturally in an empty room at 35 feet. You have anybody walk between you and you've got a risk of a dropout. So having internal recording in that environment, don't misunderstand me, I love
Sure.
what Shure is doing. In that environment, having that internal recording backup in case you lose signal, in case, those things are all Wi-Fi. Most
Yeah.
of them are Wi-Fi to the receiver. And if you've got a ton of people walking around on Wi-Fi, you can end up with issues. And every
Yeah.
booth has their own Wi-Fi set up on a different channel. So
Yeah, and you notice
yeah.
that like at a show like like imaging or the photography show or the podcast show, which was very notable. You get those issues. If you're sort of a content creator and you go out with your phone and you're not necessarily in those kind of scenarios where there's loads of other people with lots of different signals, then you're not really going to have any issues with that virtually ever. So I like the simplicity of that, and I'll be trying them out very shortly, and also be able to give a full review of those. But that's a really cute little thing where you don't need an extra receiver anymore. You don't need to plug anything into, I mean, it's just the simplicity part of it that I find quite attractive. So we'll see how
And
that works out.
If you're close enough, it'll work absolutely fine if you're close enough.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
The problem is now you're back to that analog photography world where you're a wedding photographer shooting film and you can't take the stress of wondering, did the photos come out? Because now it's going to your phone. Somebody's got to be operating the phone, hopefully. But in my case, when I used to use my phone and my monopod, I'd do it solo. I'd set it up and then I'd walk in front of the camera. You don't know if there's a dropout unless somebody's got headphones in monitoring that feed.
Yeah.
And you're going to find out later, oh man, they said that brilliant thing. And that's when somebody didn't see so when I was at WPPI one time, I had to stop using my wireless and run 20-foot mini 1/8-inch jacks with corded labs
Right.
to guests. So I love where tech is. My problem is people got to understand that there are environmental issues with consumer tech. All consumer tech pretty much has, like cell phones, have a thing on them that says this will not interfere with other devices and will accept interference if needed. That's how everybody plays together nice. So, for me, Shure did it right in the size. It would be wonderful to own multiple.
Yeah.
Right? It would be wonderful to own the Shure when you're at imaging and you're in a hallway and you see Dave Williams and you go, hey, can I interview, or whoever, right? And you say, could I interview you really quick for my podcast? I do a podcast called Camera Shake Podcast. Do you mind if I interview you? Sure, no problem. You clip that on them, you set the phone up, or they'll Bluetooth, I think, right to the Osmo too. I think you can get Bluetooth for it. And you do the interview and you're done. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, that's a cool thing about the Osmo because it connects with the DJI mic, and it'll just record internally. It's an ease of use sort of thing. I mean, I was running around last year at the photography show. Sennheiser gave me a mic and receiver setup, which was like more frequency based, and it worked really well. Although it wasn't without its technical issues, it did have some technical issues with that. But in principle, it worked much better than a little Rode, like a little Rode Go, mic or something. And of course, the thing is what I prefer when I'm running around interviewing people, I prefer to do it roving reporter style, where I literally just have one microphone and I'm basically just interviewing the person. It's so much quicker. I don't have to clip anything on anybody. It's a simple thing. I don't have to, edit separate audio tracks or anything like this. It's fast. It's, it's quick. It's super efficient.
So I will tell you something I learned from Alex Lindsay at NAB this year. So Alex does a thing in the mornings called Office Hours, officehours.global. Brilliant guy, literally a brilliant guy. And he found it's kind of like magic, right? So when you do magic, there's misdirection. So there's going to be a point where I'm doing something with cards. I should pull the cards up. When I'm doing something with cards, and as I'm moving, I don't want this hand to move because I want you to focus on this hand, whatever it might be. And the problem with this, with a microphone going back and forth, is if it's audio only, you're fine. If it's video, this in and of itself is the ping pong ball. And now you have people going. And so what he did was he would go up to people and say, would you, because it's still better audio if you have a dynamic mic in front of him, right?
Yeah.
He would go up to people and say, so tell us about your gear today. I'm paraphrasing, right? But not, what does this model have? What about this model? How long have you been here? Right? It's not that. He would say, tell me a little bit about the company and give me an overview of your gear. And he'd hand them the mic.
Right.
And now they're holding the mic and the camera can focus only on them. And
There's
then
one
when he's
problem.
done, it comes back.
Yeah.
What's that?
There's one problem with that, and this is the experience that I've had when I've done exactly that, is that, people who are not used to holding a mic, they'll start out like this and they'll go, blah, 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 and then you're gone, and it's like, and you go, oh God. So personally, I actually
Yeah,
prefer.
but that's just a producer looking at him going, lift it up to your mouth. You can fix that pretty quickly.
I know, but from my perspective, I actually prefer to hold the mic and aim the mic, because then when they move their head, I can just move the mic, or when they move around. I just find that workflow wise for me, it's because I'm literally running and gunning, when I'm at a show like that. And I'm just quick in and out. I don't want to take up too much of somebody's time. I don't want to start fuffing around with like, oh, let me just clip this mic on you. Oh, let me just connect this to my camera. It's like that just isn't time. I'll stop people and I'll say, hey, Scott, do you have a second? Do you mind talking to me about a Camera Check podcast? Yeah, sure, cool. What do you want to know? Blah, 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 blah. And we're done. We're in and we're out and we're done in seconds.
Right.
And the advantage is that I can just create a lot more content that way, because I'm not getting, that's why I feel anyway, I'm not getting bogged down by having to set stuff up. One of the things that I've done traditionally.
You're going to have to set something up because you've got to video it.
Oh, super simple, because I run around with, traditionally is what I've done in the past, I run around with a gimbal, a DJI Pro gimbal with my camera on it. And so what I tend to do at a photography show is I don't even take a tripod with me anymore, because the gimbal itself has a little tripod built in, and there's surfaces everywhere, and I'll just plonk it down, aim, ready to go. And that's that's the thing. And I just totally rely on the eye autofocus tracking, by the way, with this, obviously.
Okay, so let me ask you this then.
Right.
This is going to be an interesting one. I don't disagree with anything you've said with a real microphone, but it drives me nuts when somebody has a DJI, lav mic or a Rode Wireless Go, and they're doing this.
Oh my God. Yeah. So, which is why, let me show you this.
And I'm like, really? It's allowed. If you're going to use that mic, take the time to magnet it on or clip it on, please. Or go buy the actual Rode handheld mic. Something, anything.
So,
but that.
Which is why, I don't know if you can see it, but so Rode make this thing, which, let me show you this. So, it's like a handle, and the Go basically clips into this, okay? And then you put the fluffy thing over the top, and now you look like a roving reporter. Super simple. And it's just, that's easy. And then, of course, you can, if you need to clip it onto somebody, you just take it off and you clip it onto somebody. So it makes sense. Again, for me, it also means, because this is really light, and it weighs nothing. and it's just easy for me to carry around because I'm on my feet all day at a show like that. Whoops, now I've broken that. Never mind.
It's
You know,
dead.
so probably. You know, so I'm running around all day. I can just take this and stick this in my back pocket or my jeans, you know, and I don't have anything weighing me down all the time. You know, the first time Nick and I went to the first time we went to the photography show, and we did an episode there. We had a field recorder. I was wearing a backpack, and I had the field recorder clipped into a strap, and we had like XLR leads, and we had, I think we used SM58s or something, whatever we used, right? We had 2 of those, and man, I looked like a freaking Ghostbuster, you know, running through the show. Like,
I have a video from years ago on my YouTube channel where, again, I have this monopod, and it's a monopod that has 3 flip out feet.
yeah,
And on top of it, I would mount my phone. Now, in those days, it was with a clip to clip my phone in.
yeah,
Excuse me. And then I would Velcro a Zoom H4n on the front.
Yep.
With 2 XLR to 1/8-inch adapters, because in those days the Rode Wireless Go wasn't 2 mics to 1 receiver; it was
Right.
2 mics to 2 receivers.
Oh,
So
God,
I
yeah.
would clip the receivers into the 1/8-inch jack, clip them on the Velcro, 1/8-inch jack them to an XLR adapter. Have to set the levels in the Zoom H4n. It was brilliant at the time. It worked, but my God, now literally, if I was going to interview at Imaging, I'd have my wife hold my phone. I'd make sure I was in good light. I would buy the new DJI or new Rode that had internal 32-bit recording in case
Yeah.
the person goes, you know, starts screaming. Have the receiver go into the phone just for a sync track, a good sync track. And what more do you need? Like, it is so stupid simple now to do
Yeah.
on the street interviews. You could do a whole podcast episode that way if you had a way to power your phone long enough recording high-end video.
Yeah,
The,
exactly.
the wonderful thing is, think about this. Think if you had your laptop with you, right? And you talked to the people at Imaging, which they would do, right? And you said, hey, I'm with the Camera Shake podcast. You've given me, you know, a media credential. Do you have a room for podcasters? Oh, yes, we do. Okay, cool. You go in that room. I remember being at a conference once with Frederick Van Johnson, This Week in Photo. And again, he had a big Zoom and he had cables and XLRs running to SM58s everywhere. And now you could sit in a room with a laptop, an Ecamm, which is what you're using now, and set up multiple phones, which on a Mac OS with an iPhone, that phone can come in as a camera straight away, right? Very, very easily. You could set up literally a phone shooting all your guests, a phone shooting just the host, a phone shooting whatever. Those could easily all connect to either an ATEM or just wirelessly into Ecamm, and you'd have a full switcher with multicam, multi-mic capability with literally in a shoulder bag.
Exactly. And imagine if you just used OpSpots for that, who can actually track you and follow you as well. So even if you're moving, you get some slightly more dynamic shots. I mean, that's actually an idea that we talked about at GoDocs a little while ago for next year's podcast show in London, where we basically thought, you know, wouldn't it be cool to actually have a podcast table at the show, you know, on the GoDocs stand with a bunch of OpSpots, you know, microphones, whatever, all set up, and we'll just do a live podcast show with some guests on there, and we'll film it all with the OpSpots, and we'll have it all on monitors. You know, let's say, for argument's sake, let's say 3 OpSpots, 3 monitors. So you can get a live feed of each camera. You can see what's going on and what each camera is seeing, and you know, and then you'd have somebody maybe on a 4th monitor just switching, you know, basically being a live producer, you know, at a time, so you can kind of almost also see what the final product would look like. And
Would
just,
an
you know,
OBSBot work though? Because they're USB. So you're going to run 3 USBs into one computer? Three
well,
USB cameras into one computer can become difficult. So you're better off if you can do the. I think the higher end OBSBots might do NDI, at which
Yeah,
point
they
then
do.
you're set.
yeah, they do.
Yeah,
They do
then you're
NDI.
done.
Yeah, and of course you can also just run them in a switcher. You know, that's the other thing, because OpSpot.
They do
Oh.
HDMI.
Yeah, they do HDMI. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I used to
The
use HDMI
OBSBot
all the
does
time.
HDMI?
Yeah, and OBSBot also do their own switcher now.
So you could run all those into an ATEM Mini
Yeah.
and just switch from there, and then have an iPad up with the OBSBot software. So the offline cameras that you weren't switched to, you could repoint at somebody else and reframe. I mean,
Yeah.
and again, all of this would pack up in the size of a suitcase.
Oh,
It's
even smaller than that. It'd be
insane
tiny.
what you can do now. Insane what you can do right now.
Exactly, and especially with the OBSBots. With the OBSBots, you have the Air, which is, I mean, it's still like not much bigger than this. It's still maybe a little bit taller. But you also have the Mini, which is tiny. So
Tiny.
tiny. Yeah, and
And they
it's
do
really
hand
not bad.
gestures too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can control it with hand gestures. They're really quite clever. I did try out their switcher at TikTok, at a TikTok conference not too long ago. It was literally brand new. They had literally just been sent this over from China, and it was they were literally unpacking it on the show, and we had to go with it. It was really very clever. I think it connects a maximum of 3 cameras. So it's not like a huge switcher, but it's got a built-in screen, and it's just unlike the ATEM where you need an external screen. This thing had everything built in. It was relatively small. You could do a whole bunch of different things. It was actually a really small, really practical little setup. So if you did like video podcasting, I should say, on the go, I mean, this literally fits into your camera bag, or your backpack or something. It's nothing. So,
Yeah,
interesting
it's
stuff.
Sal Sincata, Canon Explorer Light. Sal Sincata does a conference every year in the Midwest. And one time he said to me, "You should come out and do a podcast from there." And I'd love to do something like that, but at the time, it would have been much more cumbersome because to me, I don't want to do host a panel type thing, right? So I'm moderating the panel and there's 3 or 4 guests. I don't want just a wide shot of the whole panel.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a camera on everybody, but in a case like that, you could have one camera on the 2 people far left, one camera on the other 2 people, one camera on the host. And a wide camera. You could do it with probably 3 cameras. And nowadays, I didn't feel like flying with a ton of gear and lighting gear and stuff like that. Nowadays, you could literally do this so stupidly easy.
Yeah.
Not cheap. I mean, you got to buy the gear. If you're not going to do it all the time, it's not worth it. But if you want to go in the field and record podcasts, it can be done now so cost effectively.
And it's
at what used to be broadcast quality.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, I don't know if you've noticed this as well, but in the podcast world, especially in this video podcast world, the production quality is really, I feel like over the last year or two, the production quality has increased dramatically. Because you look at podcasts like Joe Rogan, for example, that's always been, initially it looked like, originally it looked like 2 security cameras basically trained at each guest, and it was pretty shocking. But you look at things like Diary of a CEO, for example, or Chris Williamson's podcast. They're shot like they're lit and shot like a TV show. I mean, they look great, actually. Sometimes I'm not necessarily always agreeing with the content, but that's a whole different thing. I'm just looking at the visuals of it. They're really well done, and I'm always trying, because you know what it's like. I'm always trying to figure out how many cameras are there, how many angles are there, how are they doing this, how they're lighting it. And I'm thinking like, wow, okay, well,
how are they miking it? How are they? Yeah, all of it.
Yeah, and so it's always the SM7B. With all of those, it's like this is a thing. But I think it's a look. It's a podcasty, trendy look as well as the other thing. But the camera thing is interesting. I mean, they're using at least 5 cameras actually. So 1 wide shot and then 2 close-ups on the host and the guest. So you've got the angle close-up at the standard conversation shot, but then you also have another more detailed close-up, like a side shot, for example. And it also looks like there's a camera operator on at least that shot, because that shot changes sometimes. So they must have at least 5 cameras and at least 2 camera operators for each episode. So
It's
interesting thing.
We live in an amazing time. from both a photography, video, audio, production point of view. It's part of the reason I there are certain YouTube channels I watch that I would watch more if they had better audio or if they had better video. You know, there's a couple I can think of right now that the product, and this is really weird. The production isn't horrible. The set's not bad. They don't understand how to set a white balance. So the people are purple, right? Or pink. And it's clearly not natural. And it's like, I really wish that you would calibrate your picture to your lighting and yada, yada, yada. But we live in an amazing time where there are some people out there doing amazing production, shooting great B-roll, taking the time to edit it in. And it's funny because I don't think a lot of people who watch content, especially on YouTube, understand how much time that takes. Like I've had people make negative comments on my shows before, which, okay, that's fine. You don't have to like me or whatever. But, you know, they'll complain about something. And my response is, no problem. I'll refund you the amount that you paid to watch this free content.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You don't have to like me, but you also don't have to take the time to leave. And you can leave a negative comment, but you don't have to take the time to, you know, leave a comment that, you know, attacks me personally or attacks or says something very disparaging about the guest that just gave an hour of their time for free to share their experience and knowledge because it wasn't what you wanted or we didn't get to it as fast as you wanted. And I think we live in an amazing time. I wish more YouTubers, more content creators would put the time in to edit, right? Not just run and, you know, record it and put it up, but take the time to produce something. And I also wish that more people that are getting content as a commodity, you know, as a free benefit to technology being where it is, would also respect that, look, I don't have to like what you do, but it's like opera. I'm not going to go buy an opera album and I'm going to have a hard time listening to it for long, but my God, I can recognize that they took some time, learned a skill, and they're really good and talented people.
Yeah.
Right. It's that. I wish more of that. And you know, looking forward again to the topic at hand, what's coming down the road, to me, what's coming down the road depends on a multi-layer solution. We need vendors, manufacturers to properly understand and predict. And if they mispredict, you know, like for example, my phone takes 9 shots and assembles them into a shot in the blink of an eye, and I get a shot. Even if I shoot a RAW on my iPhone, it's an Apple RAW and it's got Apple's magic sauce thrown in, right? Why do we have cameras now that have large sensors? Like Apple can only do so much with their magic sauce if that phone is being shot at a concert and ends up at, you know, 3200 ISO on a sensor the size of a pencil eraser, right? When I have a 35 millimeter sensor in a Canon camera, and they now in the R1 have the ability, or R5 Mark II, to do this amazing AI noise reduction, and the result is not a DNG RAW. The result is a JPEG, which does me no good because I need to see the raw data to figure out how much noise reduction I want and where. The fact that we don't have proper computational photography at the raw level in a major camera brand mirrorless right now, the fact that Nikon and Canon both don't have, they're all going for a global shutter, which is awesome. Get me a global shutter. I love it. But the fact that in 2024, there is no talk about the fact that give me iPhone level processing, pixel level processing that I can turn off, right? I'm not saying do what Samsung did. And that is if I take a picture of a moon and it's a blob, you're going to, through AI, swap out the moon that I shot, which is what Samsung phones did. I'm not talking that. I'm talking you when I shoot with your lens, you have lens profiles to correct lens aberration, to correct vignetting from your lens. You know what happens with that sensor when it shoots at 10,000 ISO. The fact that you don't have computational photography to fix those shortcomings, nothing more, not creating stuff, not AI, quote unquote, in the picture, but AI processing to correct what we cannot do because of physics in 2024, and there's no talk of that, is disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've always found it's a weird disparity in terms of technology between, the progress of computational photography in a small device like a phone, and then you're looking at a $6,000 camera that's basically dumb as a brick, ultimately.
Yes.
I mean, and that's
what? Take that camera, take the screen off, give me a slot, let me slide my phone in, put an app on my phone.
Exactly.
You don't have to do firmware updates to your camera anymore, right? The whole software for your phone for your camera could be in my phone. And I connect my phone to the back, and it's got a USB-C, whatever you want to do. I don't care. All you got to do is update your app. And your entire software for the phone is an app for your camera is an app on my phone. I'm not saying that's the best scenario, but I'm saying there's an option, right? So now I've got the processing power of a full Apple processor. All you got to worry about is capturing the picture and writing an app.
And the thing is, there's simple, practical things like, autofocus is always a thing. So I don't remember ever filming anything with my iPhone that was out of focus. You move around, you move back and forth, blah, 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 blah. It's always in focus. With a mirrorless camera, regardless as to whether it's a Canon or a Nikon or whatever, and some people might say, oh yeah, but the Canon autofocus tracking is much better than blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But nevertheless, there's always that small chance that it misses. The dang iPhone never misses. On the shot you need. Yeah, on the shot you need, exactly. So it's much more reliable than it used to be and all that kind of stuff. But an iPhone is always reliable. And I don't even think about the focusing. It's this thing. You don't even think about it. It's not even a thing, So that's the thing.
I think about it, and I'm the one guy who lifts it up, and I don't trust that it grabbed the right subject. And especially in portrait mode, I touch where I want. But, there's a good example. The iPhone has had cinematic mode, which is effectively portrait mode for video for a couple of years now. So in cinematic mode, portrait mode is it finds the subject, blurs everything behind. In cinematic mode, it does that for video so that if you and I are on different focal planes, I can focus on you. And on the screen, if I touch the person that's in the background, it blurs the person in the front and fades focus it does a pull focus in my phone.
Yeah.
The fact that I don't have that on a Canon, you're talking about, they keep giving me touch screens that are this big on the back of a mirrorless camera, which to me, I barely use the touch screen. But okay, you're going to give me a touch screen. Give me the ability to, in autofocus mode, touch what I want and do a cinematic blur.
Yeah. And, there's things like, let's say I take some pictures and I want to upload them to Instagram or Facebook or whatever the app is, but I have to, first of all, transfer them either onto my computer or transfer them onto my phone in order then to upload them. That's nonsense. You should be able to connect your camera to the cloud to some degree, I mean, why? This is what I mean. It's like there's this sort of disparity sometimes in technology, and you can really see why a lot of people just go, well, why would I spend that amount of money on a camera when my phone does all of that and it does it better and faster and in many ways a lot less complicated. This is the way you get pictures off your camera. Like I'm at a show, I want to turn around a couple of shots for the marketing director at the venue. It's not like I can have my camera and my phone on the same wireless network and I can connect to my camera and browse my pictures. Or, okay,
it's an ad hoc network. The camera creates its own network. My phone, I just connect to that network. I browse the pictures, grab the one. No, I have to load a Camera Connect application
Yeah.
that connects to the camera and then gives me a horrible visualization that's super slow, and then
Very
download
laggy.
through their app. The fact that I can't just connect to the file system in that camera and get my pictures off is crazy. It's just
Yes.
nuts.
Yeah, I know, and it's it's also like it's so incredibly slow. Like for example, you could take the Nikon app is a really good example. I mean, Nikon only what is it, like only a few years ago they started rolling out SnapBridge, which is a much improved version of the original Nikon app. The original Nikon app was total trash. It was completely unusable, and SnapBridge isn't great, has to be said. It's a lot more usable. I use it all the time. I use it as a review monitor, when I'm setting up a shot or when I'm filming myself when I'm talking to camera, for example. I use that instead of having an external monitor plugged into the camera. I always use the SnapBridge app. And it works for that, but it is slow and it's laggy and it's super annoying. And I always have to connect it twice. And I don't know what's up with that. You connect it once, it connects,
Eh,
then it stops working.
Yeah, every time.
And
Every time. It takes more than one.
every time.
Same with Canon. And there's so many things that they do so stupidly wrong. I mean, really honestly, like here's another one.
Yeah.
And I don't know how Nikon does theirs, but Canon has a webcam app where if
Right.
you connect, because you don't want to use HDMI out or whatever, if you connect your camera over USB and you launch their app, it's a camera interface that turns your wonderful $4,000 R5, $6,000, whatever it is, $3,000 R6 II into a webcam. But this is another example of these camera companies completely misreading the room. We live in a world where everybody's doing Zoom. Now, granted, Zoom doesn't even do 1080 by default, right? Zoom is limited to 720 unless you have one of their, higher end accounts. But if I'm doing FaceTime with somebody or whatever it is, or Ecamm like we're doing now, if I was using that, I wouldn't get 1080, and you can record me at 1080 because Canon limits it to 720 unless you pay.
Oh, right. Okay.
Now, I bought
Nice.
the camera, and one of the perks to me being in the Canon ecosystem should be you make it easy for me to use that camera as a webcam. The fact that you want to nickel and dime me to get 1080 instead of 720, like you're going to give it to me for free, but you're going to handicap it, there's no other word for it. From a business to client customer relationship point of view, it's disgusting. It's a complete disrespect for your consumer base.
Yeah, it's just morally wrong.
It is.
That's what it is. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, Nikon's system is
Soapbox.
very cumbersome, and it's and you never know, because with Nikon's app, it basically it's not really an app. It's almost like a little interface software thing that just you download it, then you don't actually know whether it's working or not because there's nothing to look at. It's just that the next time you open Zoom, all of a sudden it pops up as a connection option. You go, oh, it is there. All right, okay. No, they could have told me somehow. The whole thing it's really not. It's not very well thought out, in general. And the fact of the matter is, if you're spending thousands of dollars or thousands of pounds on, on a mirrorless camera like that, then actually using it as a webcam, although it seems like complete overkill to some extent, but actually that's just a basic function that we should really be able to expect just simply nowadays. This should just be a straight up thing. It's a massively awesome camera. You should be able to use it as a higher end webcam. Why not? Because otherwise you might as well just photograph anything on your phone or a small. If
There's
quality
no
didn't matter,
technological boundary to it.
exactly,
And in
there isn't.
fact, they shouldn't even need their extra software. They could make it where you hook it up USB and it's recognized as a default webcam. That's
Exactly.
possible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that they could, again, part of me thinks that it's camera executives like the record companies did back in the day saying, I understand we're going that way. I understand sooner or later this is going to happen. I just can't let it be on my watch. I retire in 2 years, right?
Yeah, and it's this thing, the thing that you said earlier, where you were talking about, this fragmentation of the product range. I think that's part of it, because they're constantly thinking like, okay, well, we need another model in between this model and this one, but how can we cannibalize this, but not too much, because then nobody's going to buy the R5 if we give the R6 too many features, and it's just all that's nonsense. I mean, it's the same. I was going to actually, when you were talking about this earlier, I was going to comment on Nikon's product line. I don't really understand what the point is of the Z7 now. Now that there's a Z8 and a Z6 III, which is it's a very good camera, a very good hybrid camera. There's the Z8, which is basically all you need most of the time, unless you're specifically shooting sport. But the Z8 is a really great, fantastic all-around camera. Smaller, design, so that it's easier on a gimbal, for example. It's great for video. It doesn't have the built-in battery grip like the Z9. So if you do hybrid shoot and you use it for video a lot and use gimbals and stuff, it's much more practical. But other than that, the Z8 is basically essentially a smaller Z9's got all the same technology in there by and large. I just don't see the point in the Z7. I just don't understand why the Z7 is even still a thing. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
Well, I'm on mute again. That conversation's happened, inside Nikon.
Yeah.
In a boardroom, in a meeting, somebody went, wait a minute, we're coming out with a Z8. We've got the Z6 III brand new. What's the Z7 for, right? And somebody had an answer for it. I can't figure out what it is.
I tell you, I think what the answer may have been, oh, well, but there are lots of people who already have a Z7 II, and they're going to most likely upgrade to the Z7 III rather than the Z8. And so maybe there's a segment there that we can catch. But again, it doesn't make any sense to me. It's nonsense.
But that's all going to be, their upgrade path is going to be based on pricing and feature set. So exactly. if you wrap your, okay, here it is. The bigger problem with these companies is they have decades of history of running their product line as fear of handicapping, like you said, fear of cannibalizing something, and therefore handicapping things. Like one of my biggest complaints, it exists now still, but it's not as bad. But back in the DSLR days, I used to have people argue with me on their on their 5D Mark IV, that they in concert photography would use spot metering, and I would say, well, do you move your focus point from the center? Oh yeah, I move my focus point up and to the rule of thirds, and I put that on their face, and I'm using spot metering. I said, then what's under the center focus point? Oh, just the back of the stage. I said, okay, well, you're metering on the back of the stage. No. I'm metering where I move my focus point. No, you're not. Because it's only software. It would not cost them anything to put that in a 5D Mark IV, but only the 1 series does spot metering leave the center point. Only on a 1 series for a Canon does spot metering, which is a very small metering circle, move with the AF point. Even today, an R5 Mark II, $4,000 whatever body, if you are in spot metering, it will always meter off the center dot, center focus point, which means if I've got a singer under a spotlight on the right side of the frame, and I've moved my focus point up and to the right and put it on their face, and they're lit up with a spotlight, and the rest of the stage is black, I'm metering black. My meter is useless to me. Like literally, you've given me a feature that is useless to me because you simply won't let it move. You have the software. You handicap it. Yeah. And I think these companies for decades are in that process of I'm going to differentiate my product line by features I manually limit, not features that camera can or cannot handle or its size. The better differentiator is, do I need a battery grip? Do I need 24 frames a second at a higher frame rate versus 45 frames a second, no battery grip, and a lower frame rate?
Yeah, it's I think it's one of these eternal discussions. We could talk about this for hours, for hours and hours. Um, Before we close out, though, there's a question that was posted, and it's a question for you actually. Um, and the question is there any chance that Steve Brazill and Don Komarechka will bring back the BTS critique episodes?
Yeah, I would love to do those again. So, critiquing for my podcast, Behind the Shot, for those who don't understand the question, Don Komarechka, who is a friend of both of ours and a macro photographer genius. Don is from Canada, and at the time we started on my show, I did a kind of a secondary show where I critiqued images. People would submit images, and each show, Don and I and one guest would go through 9 images and critique them. And it was some of the most fun I've had in doing podcasting. Don is brilliant. We always had a brilliant guest on, and then I was there to just kind of fill space. And it was a blast. Then Don moved to Bulgaria. And when he moved to Bulgaria, we did it a couple of times, but the time differences made it difficult. And the reason is, for Don, he has a family. So late at night is difficult for him because his kid goes to bed. Morning is easier for him. The problem is, for me, morning for Don is like 11 o'clock at night for me, but I'm a US-based podcast. I have listeners all over the world. But hands down, the overwhelming majority of my viewers that might watch live are US based. And we would do these shows for 2 hours. So it would go from like 11 or 11:30 to 1 or 1:30. And people on the East Coast, that's 4:30 in the morning for them. They couldn't watch it live. They could watch it after the fact. Yes, that is true. But it was most fun when we had interaction and people live. So that's part of the reason that it faded away, was the schedules were difficult. I can't do morning. So for him to do it evening is early morning for me. The problem is I'm always awake until 3, 4, sometimes 5 o'clock in the morning.
As I know very
9,
well.
Oh yeah, because we're texting back and forth when it's 4 o'clock in the morning for me.
Exactly.
So for me to do 8, 9 in the morning is literally like living in hell. So yes, is there a possibility Don and I will do these again? Very definitely. Have we talked about it? Very definitely. It's just, me deciding really, do I want to do it at 11 o'clock at night when my wife is asleep in the room next to me and I'm in here talking and laughing and making noise? It's those type of things. Don't count it out. Yes, it could happen. I've thought about bringing it back. Look, it's my thing. It's my show. I've thought about bringing it back with somebody other than Don that's US based. The truth is I just have never pulled the trigger on it because it's kind of something I've just always done with Don, and I really like doing it with Don, and I like the way he thinks. And but yes, it's possible. Simple answer is yes, it's possible. Thank you for asking.
Or maybe you have to move to Bulgaria. Then it will match up again.
I want to get there. We were just in Central Europe, and we were going to try and get to Bulgaria to see Don and Slovenia to see Photo Joseph. And it just didn't work out schedule-wise. They're a little hard you got to make a couple of hops to get there. So it was a little tough. But we had a lot of fun where we did go.
Fantastic. Well, Steve, it's always a pleasure having you on the show, of course. I want to do these live streams more often, if you're up for it, which definitely do that much more regularly, because it's fun. Game. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
I'm always game. Usually I feel better because I hadn't had the food poisoning. But I'm always game to get on with you, my friend. I love chatting with you. That's part of the problem, is you and I get talking and we really don't know where the conversation will go.
Yeah, and we don't know where to finish it, because it's like we're like, oh yeah, we're just gonna do for an hour, and then there we are 2 hours later. But yeah. It's always fun. And of course, we're going to be able to hang out in, only a few weeks really from now over in Dallas. So remember, if you're listening, in fact, if you are still listening or watching, leave a comment down in the comments below, because that would be fun. And also remember, if you are UK based, check out this discount code for the photography show, 8th to the 11th of March in London at the Excel. Use the code SBK25 and you get 20% off the ticket price, which is super awesome. And the only reason you get that is because I'm a speaker there, and the nice people from the photography show have given me this code to share with you all. So that's awesome. And what's the other thing? Oh, if you like the show, let me just get rid of this. You can always support the show at buymeacoffee.com/camerashake. Buy the coffee. It will help us out. It will keep my kids in Netflix. So thank you very much. Anyway, let me just find that button again. Boom, here we are. Cool. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for hopping on for this live stream, and we'll be back in the not too distant future. In fact, there's a new episode coming out tomorrow, so check that one out as well. And of course, don't forget to head over to behindtheshot.tv and check out that awesome podcast there as well. Steve's got some fantastic guests on. It's a really interesting format, I have to say. It's, how would you describe it? You always say you're interviewing the photo and not the photographer, which is, I always find it's a super interesting way of looking at it.
One of the bigger comments that I get is that I don't ask a question and then let the guest answer for an hour and then ask a question because I never started this to be an interview show. I am not interviewing my guest. I don't look at it that way. I don't approach it that way. I understand some people think that's what it is and that I offend them when it's not that. And I'm okay with that, strangely. The way I look at it is it's what you and I just did. It's myself and a photographer having a sitting around a coffee table conversation, interviewing one of their photographs. And the idea is I want to understand, it's kind of like reverse engineering, but I want to understand how they got in the scenario to take that photograph, why they made the choices that they did, what worked, what didn't. So it's taking a closer look behind the making of one of their shots to better understand how their mind works. Because if I understand what thought process went into shooting one of their photos, I understand their portfolio better, right? And I just recorded a show I've got one out now, and then the next show, I don't do as regular as I used to, but I've got a show in the can that's going to be released with my buddy Ian Spanier about a new book he's got coming out. And I found it interesting because it's on a topic he doesn't really care about, but it was a personal project for him over 17 years. And so we talk about multiple photographs, and it's interesting to kind of see how he went through his mindset for each of those photographs, because it gives you an idea of the type of photographer and creative that Ian is. So yeah, that's basically the show.
Cool. And we just had a comment from Norman there. Norman, say, sorry, I got in late, but we'll watch again. Absolutely no problem. You've got 2 hours of this beautiful live cast to catch up on.
And Norman, thank you for coming in. Much appreciated. Norman and I follow each other online. You should follow Norman online, by the way. And you can find his name and everything to search him in his comment down below. But yeah, and Norman's a good example. So Norman and I have talked back and forth many times, usually on Twitter or something like that. And that to me is what we were talking about, full circle now. When we started talking about imaging and why I go, right? It's that kind of community. Like there's people like Norman that I've known for a very long time online. I've never met the man. And yet we've talked many, many times back and forth. We've had conversations. The world we live in photography is really wild, right? It has the ability to get people from disparate backgrounds, perhaps disparate political opinions, various geographic locations, and let us all kind of social media lets us text each other in a way, even though we don't know each other and have our phone numbers. It's a really cool thing, the world that we live in, and that's what photo conferences are to me.
Exactly. And we get another comment from Daniel Oberdanner. Daniel, good to see you here. I know you've been following the show for a while. Thank you so much. It's midnight over in Switzerland. Man, that's dedication. So thank you so much for sticking around until midnight. Fantastic. Awesome.
And then
Cool.
Norman left another one saying he just started proper photography 2 years ago, and that my podcast was one of the first that he started listening to, which I so appreciate. And you know what I mean when I say this. I don't ever take for granted that anybody listens to my podcast. Now, it's funny. I don't make my podcast for a specific audience. I never have. I probably should. I'd be bigger if I probably did, right? If I really worried about that. I just don't. I make a show. I watch every show I do back start to end as I edit it. Every show I watch in full before it publishes while I'm editing it. And I make a show I want to see. And I make a show that I'm interested in. And yet I have comments like that, or Aki Fujita out of Japan has made a joke to me before that, she partially learned English from listening to my podcast, which is a huge mistake, not something you should do. But still, again, this is, isn't it though, Kirsten? This is kind of a cool world that we live in, that we can just do something because we really want to, because we really are passionate about it. And hopefully there are other like-minded people that watch what we do and click with it, at which point now you immediately have something in common with somebody else.
And, incidentally, that's why I want to start doing these live casts, more regularly, because you can bring the audience in, you can have more of a conversation, when people start commenting,
Right.
you can talk about things. I think it's a really interesting addition to the regular show. So I really like this format, and I want to make this like a regular occurrence. And it's it's always good to have these slightly slightly freer conversations, because there are certain boundaries within a standard episode, because they have to be edited and all the rest of it, and you have to promote them and blah blah. And there's all this other stuff that goes on around that. But with these live streams, live casts, whatever you want to call them, it's a much easier, much freer sort of format, and I think it's it's a fun thing to do. We could talk about all sorts of different things, whether it's photography, video. We talked about trade shows. We talked about gear, and again, it's like you say, we never really know where the conversation will take us. It'll just take us somewhere,
Yeah. We got into audio, even though effectively most people come looking for photography for you and I.
Yeah.
We talked about other photographers or creatives, the Dave Claytons of the world, the Dave Williams of the world, that, the Scott Kelbys of the world, that we appreciate and like. Part of the reason I like live, like when I used to do the thing with Dawn, we had people come in that were there religiously every time and would comment, and they got to, this is the weird thing, they got to know each other. So there were certain people, Terrell Woods, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but they would start joking with each other, and then these recurring jokes would come show to show.
Yeah.
Right. And some of them tacky, but classily tacky, if there's such a thing. And at that point, now you have community, because now it's not one to many, right? It's kind of one to many, many to one to one through. It's this weird kind of relationship builder that you don't get from an edited podcast that you release.
Like Daniel saying, "I watched you, Steve, for years. Love it." Yeah, and actually, Daniel, I used to watch Steve's show before I ever started the Camera Shake podcast. Behind the Shot was one of those shows I've been watching for years before that. But there were a number of different photography podcasts. The Photobomb podcast with Gary Hughes and Boo Ray Perry was another one that I really liked. It was really fun. And unfortunately, they jacked it in after 400 episodes, which I was very disappointed about. But
I get it. It's a lot of work. And thank you, Daniel. I typed it in there too, but thank you, Daniel. What's funny is my show does really well in Switzerland, I think. There's a couple of countries I do really, really well in, that some of them surprise me, but, to anybody who sees this, that happens to watch my show, thank you very much. It is much, much appreciated. Again, like you, the whole reason I even started it is just because I have really strong opinions. And when I listen to somebody else's podcast, Mac Break Weekly, I'm looking at you. When I listen to another podcast, the number of times that I hit pause because I don't want to miss anything and they can't hear me, but I have to interject my thoughts. Like I have no choice. It's physically not possible for me to not verbalize why I think you're right or wrong. And I already had the radio background. It was a natural fit for me. But it really, again, to me, the community that we have is amazing. I really look forward to hanging out with you again in not necessarily in Texas, but I look forward to hanging out with you again.
Yeah, we'll just turn our little part into, like, you know, what do they call it? Our own private Idaho. I'm not sure whether Idaho is so much better, but you know, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there's a funny thing. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I used to listen to your show like way before, like literally years before I ever started the Camera Shake podcast. And actually, your show was one of the shows that put me off starting my own podcast. And the reason why? Oh, I'll tell you, very simple. Because in the podcasting world, and if we just sort of focus on the photography podcasting world, there are few people who are just blessed with the perfect radio voice. Okay, and yeah, it's true. And so, you know, your voice and Boo Ray Perry's voice are just, and incidentally, actually, Boo Ray also has a history in radio, so also not surprising. You know, very very similar background to yourself. And you know, it's just, you know, I used to listen to that and I'm like, what am I even thinking? Like, I don't have a voice like that. You know, it's like, I'm always thinking like my face was made for radio, but my voice definitely wasn't, you know? And so that kind of helped me back for quite some time. And it was actually, you know, like I've said many times on the podcast, it's really only the pandemic that sort of forced me to play my card, you know, at that point. So, yeah.
Yeah, but the photography world is better for it. And here's the thing. The world we live in today has democratized being a creator, right? Anybody can do this.
Yeah.
Now, I say anybody. That said, I'm still a firm believer that there are certain people that should not do podcasting. And,
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to give a generic example. There is a podcast I listen to and a regular recurring guest, brilliant guest, super smart person, knows what they're talking about, but every third word is like. So like, and like I was thinking, like, and it's fine for 15 minutes. When it's a 2-hour podcast with 3 people, and one of those people, we all have verbal crutches. I say a lot. We all have verbal crutches. But when every third word is like, it becomes fatiguing. And the only thing I would say to people is, if you're going to start a podcast, do it. Just go do it. But be self-aware that it is still, in essence, a broadcast medium. People are listening to you. And if you want people to listen to you, be aware of your speech patterns more than your vocal pattern.
Which is why it's so important to listen to yourself on your own shows. If you do a podcast, you know, you got to listen back to the thing. And I find it much more useful to listen back to it, let's say, in the car on audio only, rather than watch the YouTube video back. So that's what I tend to do when I listen through an episode. I listen through it on audio only, because it really emphasizes all of these things, all of these audio things, the audio issues. You know, it's you know, I remember when Nick exited the show originally, and I had to take over, you know, dealing with all the audio and all that kind of stuff. You know, I was constantly listening back to the episodes and then thinking like, okay, well, that doesn't sound good, or I have to fix that, or, you know, is there a way that I can do this better, and whatever. And it was really like a fine-tuning operation, you know. And it took, and of course, what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to stop, figure all of this out, and then restart 3 months down the line or something. I just wanted to basically carry on. And yes, there are some, you know, you can kind of hear the changes at that time, you know, when you listen to when you listen really closely to the episodes, I guess you can hear it. Until I sort of got to the point where I'm happy with it. And it's, like we've talked about, it's this 80-20 rule, can I make it sound as good as Nick, the professional sound engineer or audio engineer? No, I can't, I really can't. But can I get it to sound 80% as good with 20% of the effort by using technology and all the rest of it? Yes, I can. And that allows me to carry the show on, And so that's it's a valid compromise at that point, because it's either that or not continuing to do it, if you know what I mean. So, and then as a whole, you can then take that and then continuously improve it a little bit and a little bit and a little bit until it gets a lot better. And so, that's just the philosophy, I guess. So yeah, it's super important to listen back to yourself.
That's for everybody. And here's the interesting thing. So I have old shows I never share that I still think are some of my best content. But it's back when I was using a Logitech C920 camera with bad lighting. And it's so embarrassing that I'm afraid somebody will go, my God, this guy in today's day will watch it and go, my God, his video quality is crap. Because it was. But it's some of the best content I ever made. But Daniel made an interesting comment you just put on the air. And that is, here's the similarity. Both of you are so relaxed, cool pace, not mainstream, different from others. What people don't realize when you say, you have to listen back to yourself. People listen to radio in the old days, terrestrial radio, and they think, wow, this guy's just a radio person. They have a radio voice and they do radio, and this is just what they do. It's not. In radio, we used to, not so much today, but we used to have regular weekly sessions where we would take air checks. So in the old days, it would record on a reel-to-reel or on a cassette that would record all the time. In modern days, it records every time I turn the microphone on, so I can go get it off a computer. And we would go sit in with our program director and listen to our break. So an air check only records when the mic is hot. So you get the last, 10, 20 seconds of a song, Steve talking, and then intro to a song, and I turn the mic off. So it's just me. And we'd sit there for 20 minutes going through a 4-hour air shift critiquing me, right? It's not natural to speak in a way that's abbreviated and removes words that aren't needed. Now here in a podcast format, I may not do that. But in a radio format where I want to get out of a song, hit my hit, one thought per break so that I don't confuse the listener, into a commercial in 60 seconds or whatever I want to get it in on, nobody talks like that, right? Yeah. This is conscious. You rehearse it. I still to this day, after 43, 44 years in radio, I still to this day, before I crack the mic, and I go through what I'm going to say. And then sometimes I still screw it up and I'm mad at myself when I turn the mic off. So you've got to listen back to yourself to understand what your verbal crutches are, what your pacing is. And anybody can do it. And this makes it easier. This is why morning shows work in radio. Because morning shows is more than one person, right? You're not talking. I know people who in radio used to take an 8x10 photo. They'd go buy a frame at a store that had a photo in it, and they just leave that photo in there. They'd put it in front of them and they'd talk to the person in the photo, because you want it to feel like you're talking one-to-one, not one to, you never say, hey, Southern California, because that's not personal. That doesn't catch anybody, right? It's, hey, you, this is easier. And that's the thing. If anybody that watches this is thinking, has ever thought, I think I can do better than Steve, do it. Go do it.
Absolutely. It's actually very similar. What you've just described is very similar to my experience when, as a musician, I used to be a session musician. I used to play the guitar, and I used to play as a backup guitarist for lots of bands and, lots of people. But I used to accompany people. So I didn't sing, I wasn't the front man. I basically back up another vocalist or be part of a band. And I really used to love that position, because you don't really have the responsibility of having to entertain the audience or communicate with the audience very much, but you can just sit back and be part of the rhythm section and just create a really cool wall of sound behind your lead singer or your frontman or front girl. But there was a time when I started doing solo acoustic guitar gigs, and they were instrumental guitar gigs, steel string guitar, all instrumentals, no singing, because, I don't sing for the benefit of mankind, or for love or money. So, and the world is a much better place for it. Trust me. But so, it was basically instrumental guitar music. And the only reason I did that was, and I avoided doing that for a decade, maybe 2 decades. But the only reason why I did it in the end was because I used to write a lot of acoustic guitar pieces, and they used to never see the light of day. I used to write them, I used to play them for friends or whatever when it, used to come over or whatever. But then they used to end up in my drawer and, never to be seen again, because it wasn't my main job, and it was just something I did for fun, and it was just, I liked it. And I had friends constantly say to me, well, you have to perform that. When are you going to play this? Like, do you have to play this to an audience? Da, da, da. These pieces are cool, blah, blah, blah. And I always used to say, like, nah, that's not what I do, So I just really don't want to do it. I also don't really want to be in the center of I don't want to be the center of attention. I don't really want to be on stage on my own. All that doesn't sound very appealing to me. Bearing in mind that I've never actually really enjoyed performing. I'm much more enjoyed being in the studio, writing things, recording things. The whole gigging part was never the attractive bit about being a musician to me. And I know lots of people think differently. Lots of people love it, performing in front of an audience. I was never one of these people. But so eventually I went out and I started just doing some open mic nights, and then that very quickly turned into people booking me for gigs. And then it, for some reason, took on a life of its own. And before I knew it, I was super busy just playing these kind of shows. And it was surprising to me because I didn't really, at the time, I didn't really understand why people would find that attractive. Because I used to think like, oh, I don't even sing. Why would people want to listen to that acoustic guitar nonsense? Like, I couldn't really understand why that would be attractive to anyone. But in any event, I got lots of bookings. And so, one of the problems that I had was, because I used to play steel string guitar, I used to write different tunes in loads of different tunings. Like, I used to come up with my own weird tunings, and I used to learn other songs, and I used to like the tuning. So I used to, every song I would play, like let's say I would play a set of 10, 12 tracks. Every single track would be in a different guitar tuning. And it meant that between songs, I would have to retune my guitar every time. And so it would take like a minute or so to do that. And of course, if you think about it from the audience's perspective, you're now just sitting there watching a dude tuning his guitar on stage. I mean, it's the most abysmal, boring, atrocious experience. And of course, I realized very quickly that I'd have to do something. I had to communicate with the audience. I had to say something. I had to kind of come up with some way of engaging the audience in that time. And of course, there are many examples of people who are excellent at that. They just have the gift of the gab, or whatever you call it. They just those kind of people who can just crack jokes.
Yeah, it's natural to them.
It's natural, yeah, and it's never was natural to me at all. And so in the beginning, but I did realize that I had to do something about that. So I came up with different strategies. So for instance, at one point I thought like, oh, I'd just learn some jokes, and I turned it into a bit of a comedy thing. That really didn't work because with the pressure and everything, I was just not able to not stop with the punchline, And so that was a disaster. Until I remembered something that one of my professors at music college said to me when we were discussing performing in front of large crowds. The difference between performing in front of a large crowd and performing in front of a small crowd. Because from a musician's perspective, you would think that intuitively, if you perform in front of 60,000 people, you think that will be a lot more nerve-wracking because there's so many people, as opposed to performing in front of 20 people in a bar. But the reality of it is, if you're at a festival and you're playing in front of thousands of people, you just see that as one big mass. That's just one wall of heads, and it's in many ways, it's much more impersonal and therefore much easier. But when you're in a little bar and there's 10, 12, 20 people in front of you, every single person becomes an individual and you feel like their eyes are piercing through you, basically. And so that's much harder. It really, I found it so much more difficult. So what I realized was when I'm on stage, it's much easier to have a conversation with one person actually than it is to have a conversation with the whole crowd. So what I used to do is I used to basically pick out one person in the audience without them knowing necessarily, but I would just talk about something and I would just address it at that one person. And of course, most people in the audience would sort of feel like I'm addressing them at the same time, but really in my head, I was just talking to that one person. I would pick out one person in the third row or something, and I would just talk to them. And that then all of a sudden, it did a number of things. One, it was so much easier to just have a very simple conversation, just like with anybody. And yeah, and it also allowed me to be a lot more relaxed. Everybody felt like they were included to a degree, and so it then became a really easy thing to do. And then when you think about it, especially I had a very young daughter at the time. There's always stuff that happens, so I didn't really have to think of very many things because in that week, or in these 3 days or whatever between one gig and the next, tons of shit had happened that I could just talk about. And so so it was just a strategy to deal with that sort of scenario.
And that applies to radio. So there are mornings I'm on the air, and in my head I'm always talking to the guy that's stuck on the freeway driving, or I'm always talking to the person that's working on his car in his garage, or I'm always talking to the person that's in his backyard barbecuing, or whatever it might be. There's that type of mentality. I've been on. Looks like I'm pixelating now, am I?
Yeah,
it looks like something may have happened on my network where my signal is going down. So let me just make sure that nothing is going on network wise really quick, just to be safe. There we go. Turn my security cameras off too to be safe, and hopefully that'll bring it back. Actually, let me do this really quick. I think I know what it probably is. As long as we're doing this, it is probably. No, it is not. Yep, it is. My backup kicked in. Pause the backup. I should have stopped that. Sorry about that. Video should come back pretty quick.
Cool.
I've been on stage emceeing concerts that, I have had, 10,000 people in the audience. I can do that all day long. It's one to many. And in that scenario, I usually find somebody in the audience in a couple of different points. And I always go back to what Garth Brooks said in an interview one time. And that is, he used to, before every show, go to the farthest seat away from the stage and sit in that seat and look at the stage way down there and think, when I'm down there, how do I reach this guy? And it's the same thing. So when I'm on a stage and I'm talking to an audience, which I still do a lot of emceeing, when I'm on a stage and I'm talking to an audience, I'll look in different directions, and there's usually a specific point in each direction. Not so much a face, but a point in each direction, a section that I will look at and focus on to get that one-to-one feel. And it's not that hard, but when you're on radio, you're in a room on your own. Like, I'm in a room on my own for 4 hours. Nobody else is even in the building when I'm there usually. And I've got to somehow picture that I've got 200,000 people listening or whatever it is, and I can't see any of them. So one of the ways you overcome that is kind of what you did, and that is you paint yourself into a scenario where it is you find that one person no matter where they are, whether they're in your mind, they're in the audience, they're on the other end of a camera, whatever it is. There's so many ways that you can kind of approach that visual icebreaker. But, I think you would agree with me. The real key to being a creative in today's world, whether it be something like this, photography, creating video where you're behind the camera, whether you're in front of the camera as well, doing a YouTube channel, whatever it is, part of the key is make content you believe in. Because if you're making content you believe in, everything else becomes easier. If you're sitting in that coffee shop with 12 people, so I also used to teach computers and we had a maximum of 12 people in our classes. And that was a nightmare to me. Like, that was hell, because I could see all 12 eyes looking at me. But I really was passionate about what I was teaching. And if you find content that matters to you, that'll carry you through most of the time.
And it's, that's going to allow you to be consistent as well, over time. That's the thing. If you really, if you really love what you're doing and you're really into it, then you're going to by default carry on doing it for so much longer. That's the thing. It's, it's just in the nature of things. If you're just doing something because you think it's a good idea, then very quickly you get to the point where it becomes a drag. It becomes a hassle, and you eventually are going to stop doing it because it's just too much of a time drain or whatever else. But if it's something that you really love, a topic or a subject that you really love, then it's actually easy. And so that's always the thing. Because I always look at, sometimes you look at podcasts, for example, you think like, oh wow, they've done like 400, 600, whatever episodes. And from my own experience, I've realized that they must really love what they do, because otherwise there's no way you're going to make that many episodes and that much of an effort, to create these things. So it's it's unbelievable.
You have to really care, because even when we all know, right? Even when you love doing something, there are those days you're like, I just don't want to do it today. I don't have it in me today. And in my case, I'm at the point now where I took a break because we went to Europe, and now I'm back I've got 2 episodes, one out now and one in the can. And I don't know when my next episode will be, but I always keep coming back, and I joke with people, podcasting is a lot like getting your black belt, right? A black belt is just a white belt who kept coming. That's really what it is. It's just a white belt who kept going to class. That's all it is. You keep going. You keep pushing in some way or another is key. What did Norman say here?
Norman's saying, I like Steve's show format because I often listen when walking and driving, but will go back to watch YouTube on catch up when a picture of interest is being critiqued, and use time marks to find it. See, that's really interesting, actually, because I get that that sort of response quite a lot. That people maybe watch a little bit on YouTube, and then they hop in the car and they drive to work or whatever, and they listen to it in the car, and then maybe they watch a little bit more on YouTube. I think it's the nature of podcasting as a format that lends itself to be consumed or listened to when you're doing other things. With photographers, yes, very often it's people editing. I mean, this is the thing I get all the time, and I do it myself. When I'm editing, I spend 2-3 hours, editing images. It's, I always listen to something, and I like listening to podcasts. Sometimes I listen to music, but usually I listen to podcasts.
What Norman said is not uncommon, by the way.
Yeah,
I have a lot of people say to me, and that's why on YouTube, I get YouTube watchers mad at the format of my show, because YouTube people, it's a different audience, right? They want 10 minutes. They want you to dive in, get to the subject, and get out. And that's just not what I do, right? Yeah. So I get a lot of people leave comments, about that. And that's fine. Look, I understand. But I always say I approach it as a podcast first and foremost, because I have a lot of people who listen while they're driving to work, finish on their way home, and then go to the website or to YouTube to see the picture like Norman does. And then Daniel said he does the same thing. He likes watching or listening while he's doing laundry. Everybody, I want my podcast to be consumable. It's one of the reasons early on I insisted on having video. When I was on Frederick's network, This Week in Photo Network, we had long conversations in those days, back in 2016, about, do you really need a video podcast? Not YouTube, in a podcast feed that's expensive. Like, we have to pay for hosting these files, right? And for my podcast to be in video and in audio, I need a much larger storage in my podcast hosting, because video files, my audio files might be 60, 70 megabytes. My video files might be 300, 400, 500 meg. And that's why one of my shows, the biggest comment I got was that I interrupted Rudy on my Canon autofocus show too many times. Well, Part of the problem was at the time, my podcast hosting was very limited. And if the video went too long, the file was too big and I wouldn't be able to even release it. So I scheduled him for an hour. He had a hard out for a meeting. I'm watching the time as we're talking, and Rudy's super thorough, in-depth detail. And I'm like, oh my God, we're only halfway through the menus. And he's still going on this one question. And so I would use an old interview trick, which is you finish somebody's sentence to get it back to you and then you move on. So he'd be talking about something. I said, you know, that's a good point. I never thought about using that thing that way. So, okay, the next command is. And people complained I interrupted him a lot. And what they don't realize is I was having to try and manage time and podcasting space. Now my podcasting space is double that now. But I wanted from day one to be anywhere anybody wanted to consume it. If you wanted to watch my video on your phone in a podcast app, I'm good with that, right? I wanted it to be there, and I convinced Frederick early on, let me do video, and he did. And I still do that to this day. There's 2 separate feeds. And I think that's part of the thing is I want to create content I want to create, right? I'm not aiming at an audience. I'm hoping there are other photographers like me that like what I do. And I'm lucky that there's more than 10, right? But, but that was only my goal was I'm going to create content that, look, I see this photo. I want to dig deep into this photo. I hope other people think that way. And luckily other people felt that way. But that's the key. You got to keep going. You get up every morning. I put a lot of time into my episodes. An average episode takes me anywhere from normal episodes, probably about 8 hours with booking it, writing my notes, doing my YouTube poster, my social media graphics, which suck compared to yours. Like I so badly want to steal your designs. You know, communicating with them. They send me photos at the wrong resolution for my blog. I got to resize their photos. They send me photos that are 720, but I need a 1080 for the video. I got to up-res the photos or get new copies. And then the edit, the recording, usually my shows are about an hour or so. So call it an hour and a half with getting them in early, testing their mics, getting their levels. And then the show I just posted is an hour and a half. That was about a 4-hour edit. Because you're going through an hour and a half show, you're stopping periodically, you're muting, you know, a cough or a cuss word. You're processing the audio separately with compressor, equalizer. It takes time. Most podcasts don't make it past episode 10.
Yeah.
And it's because they get into it and realize how much time it takes. You can't do this unless you've got a voice you have to get out. And that to me, that's why people should do it. If you've got a voice, I can't stress it enough. I think you would say the same thing. If you've got a voice you feel like you can't get out, but you look at it and go, God, there's already, 4,000 photography podcasts out there. What am I going to bring that's different? You're asking the right question.
Yeah.
What are you going to bring that's different? Don't mimic somebody. Don't copy my show. Don't copy Kirsten's show. There are a lot of photography podcasts out there. What do you have that's different? And I guarantee you've got something.
Yeah, because you've got yourself. That immediately makes it different from everybody else because, nobody is like you. And that's the thing. Norman is saying, I'm editing now. How did you know? Well, if you're still awake as a photographer at this time, at this ungodly hour, then you must be editing. That's how I'm thinking.
What time is it for you?
Over here in the UK, it is 20 to midnight. And that means for Daniel, who's in Switzerland, it must be 21. Wow.
Wow. All right.
Daniel saying,
and then
cool.
Daniel also said he likes how I do. So on every episode, because I have audio listeners, about 55% of my audience listens to the audio. And then I'm assuming, I don't know really, look at the picture later. And about 45% watch the video, which is not a bad trade-off. That's still a lot of people watching the video. But for the audio people, I verbally describe the photo. And again, that's a thing I've debated over the years. I like doing it. And part of the reason I like doing it is, this is something I very rarely have said publicly. There are times that I get a guest on a show and we try and pick the shot that we're going to discuss. And I have requirements for the shot because I have to have questions about the photo or it's a boring show. Like, you could have a phenomenal photo, but if I look at it and go, your light was here, you did this, I got nothing, right? It's nothing. I got to have questions about it. There are times people pick a shot that I need to do this shot. I really want to talk about this shot. All right, cool. We'll do it. And I don't have a lot on the shot until I sit down and think to myself, how would I describe this thing verbally? And as I describe it verbally, I find the genius in the shot. Like, literally, I find the reason they're so proud of that shot that they just need to talk about that shot that I didn't see until I dissected it out loud. Literally, I do it out loud. And so I started doing that early on. And I've often wondered if some people just absolutely hate it. I get a lot of comments that people like it. It is shocking. I'm not even minimizing it. It is shocking how much I learn about the shot, the photographer as a whole, and photography as a whole by trying to describe a shot verbally out loud. It is, I think, an amazing exercise to do. So again, Daniel, thank you. Appreciate that. Melanie is here.
Do you think that your experience as a photo judge has helped you develop that ability to describe images that graphically, like literally?
Yes, I'm nodding. I forgot I'm on audio. Yes, 100%. So when the way I judge, the things that I judge, and Melody, thank you so much for coming too. What did she say, by the way? Keep describing the photos. It's stunning. So Melody used to come with her pictures into the critique things that I did with Dawn. And I'll never forget, there was one picture. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was she'll know. I think it was a little teeny birdhouse or something with a bird. And we said something about, or I said something about burning the birdhouse down a little bit. If you don't follow Melody online and you're into, in any manner, shape, or form, critter photography, specifically bird photography, dude, you're missing out, right? Amazing photographer. But I forgot what I was saying now. What was I talking about? I totally forgot. Must not have been important. About describing the shot. That's right. Yeah. About describing the shot. I believe that, I think that's what it was. What is it that? Anyway. Yeah. Describing the shot, I think you were asking about judging. That's right. So I judge image competitions for local photography groups. In America, we have PPA, Professional Photographers of America, which is who puts on Imaging USA. Each state has a chapter of PPA. So you have Professional Photographers of California, Professional Photographers of Colorado, etc. In each state, you have regions that have chapters of that state organization. So you'll have Professional Photographers of Los Angeles County, Professional Photographers of San Diego County, Professional Photographers of Orange County, Professional Photographers and Videographers of the Inland Empire, that's everything, or Inland Empire Professional Photographers and Videographers. And I'll judge for those local ones. And what will happen is a judge or an operator will say the title of the image. 3 judges will hear the title. They put the image up for the judges to see. We'll have so much time to think about them and score it. And then they'll look at the scores that nobody really knows yet and pick one of the judges to comment on the image. And you've got to be fairly brief because you might be going through 60, 70 images that night. That's where the whole critique thing came from and the describing thing came from. Now, in that scenario, it's critical that, look, I might find, I don't like to use the word flaws, but I might find 10 things in your image that I think if you had done differently might have made it a better image. And some of them, for lack of a better phrase, maybe it is a flaw, right? I can't name 10 things. The goal would be that I give you one or two things in that image that will help you see in No, I just died.
You just
Are we
froze.
dead?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I don't know if we're dead or not.
Um,
I'm
I
watching
have
the
your
live stream and you're still good. Let me reconnect.
Okay. Oh. And Steve's going to dial back in just a second. Cool. Well, it's always an interesting discussion. Here we go. Here he is. He's back. There you
Well,
are.
that was
Cool.
weird.
Frozen. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was frozen. I should be back now. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You're back. You're back.
Okay. I'm still guest number one on the live stream, it looks like, but that should probably change pretty quick. So anyway, what I was saying was, there we go. We're back. Okay. So what I was saying was, sorry to everybody about that. What I was saying was, the key is to give them one or two things that they can focus on that will improve their photography. They'll find the other ones later, right? Give them one or two. Let them focus on their composition, or let them focus on their exposure, or let them focus on the point of view that they shot from. They shot standing up and they should have gotten down because it was a child, something like that. And once they or go back when it's better light or something, once they understand those and they have that in their head for a while, they'll come back with another shot. And guess what? Those other flaws will still be there. And you'll hit them next time. And that's where the describing came from, was I wanted people to be able to see the image in their head and the brilliance. And I don't use the word lightly. I really believe some of the shots I have, these creators are amazing. And I want people to see in their mind, when somebody uses amazing composition, what that does to your brain. And by the way, that's what the image critique shows with Don were originally going to be. I wanted my image critique shows to be just like those competitions. Image would come up. We would each get 30 seconds. That's it. Say what you got to say. And Don argued that one with me and was like, I can't do that. He's like, if I see an image, I want to go through everything that I see. And I was not open to that at all. It ends out, it worked perfectly doing that. Right. There's a different thing for every need. But anyway, yes, the answer is yes. That's how that came about.
So Melody is saying your critique shows definitely helped my photography. You know, this is the thing when people talk about camera clubs and photo competitions all the time. Because you can have different attitudes towards competitions like that. On one hand, like I'm sort of split in two. On one hand, I don't really see photography as a competitive art. But on the other hand, I fully realize how much you can learn by entering your images into a competition and listen to the judge, critique your image. And I've certainly learned a ton, by going to competitions and just sitting in the audience and just listening to the judge, without even necessarily entering any images. It's just interesting because often there are things that you agree with, the things you don't agree with the judge, and all of that's fine. But very often they'll pick out something that you hadn't even thought of. And the next time you look at an image and the next time you look at one of your own images, that experience comes flowing back and you start to maybe sort of widen your horizon and you're starting to be able to be a little bit more critical of your own work. I think that's the biggest advantage with that.
So if you're watching this still after over 2 hours, that right there is worth the price of admission. I'm just telling you, because I used to have people when I was on the board of IUPPV, the local photography group. I used to say to people, look, that we're nervous to enter an image competition. I'm saying, don't go to WPPI or PPA or some big image competition, right? Do a local photography group image competition. And it's not the competition. I believe image competitions, or strike that, image critiques, proper image critiques from a trusted source are single-handedly the fastest way for you to improve your photography. And when you're in an image competition, I used to joke about the fact that I would sit in the room as people judged my image and they would shoot it down, right? Because in an image competition, you can't have blown highlights. Well, in a concert photography scenario, I've got blown highlights and I've got clipped blacks. There is no way around it, right? So I would get ripped up and I would be over there in my head saying, "You're an idiot. You don't understand what I shoot." Okay, both could be true, but it's a moot point. Because if that judge says anything, they are most likely going to say something that will make you do this. Wait a minute. I never thought anybody would see that in my photo, right? If your one takeaway is somebody saw something in your photo you didn't think, that's a win, right? I've had people submit a portrait of a girl and call it, I'm making this up, obviously, but let's say it's a portrait of a girl and they call it "The Horse Jumped Over the Moon." Like literally the disparity between the name of the photo and the photo is huge. And the first thing as judges we hear is the person will go, "The horse jumped over the moon." And then the image comes up. So we all get a picture in our head of what to expect. And we see that and we're like, what? And what I try to say to people is, you can love a photo and it can be a great photo and it can be a bad for an image comp. It can be a fantastic photo that won't work in an image comp because you were there, you smelled the smells, you heard the sounds, you had the feeling, you had the adrenaline, you knew what you were doing, you knew what the subject was doing, you had emotion behind it. I don't have the ability as a judge to say to you, explain this to me. Like I've had people where I've judged their images poorly. And they've come to me afterwards and goes, you didn't understand. So we were riding down this trail for 3 hours in the rain, and then the clouds parted, and then there was an eagle up on the nest. Okay, that sounds really cool. I didn't get any of that from your photo.
Yeah.
Like I had no clue of that from your photo. And by the way, the eagle wasn't in focus. Right. So it is one of the most amazing ways for you to realize that we are storytellers. Your picture does not have to tell the story that you intend, and it may not. You may have story A in your brain and you look at it because you were there. The only way to interpret that photo is story A, and you put it in front of me, and to me it's story B. And I'm sorry, there is no story A. I don't see story A. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It's story B. Be mad at me. Or embrace the fact that it told me a story. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that's. I always look for the story in any image. You know, what is the story that I can see in that image? You know, that might not necessarily be the same story that the photographer was going to tell, but you know, if I can see something in there for me, then that in itself is beautiful. Daniel's gone to bed. It's he's an hour ahead of us in.
Thank you, Daniel.
Over in Switzerland. Daniel, thank you so much for joining tonight. Again, you know, I'm sure Steve will be on plenty of those lives because I think that's the plan. So I let everybody know.
Norman's comment's interesting too, by the way.
Yes, let's just put that up. Right. Norman, okay, so Norman says he's working with 3 local pros on photo walks and trust their critique comments. I think that's super important to listen to other professionals. He's also saying, I do not enter club competitions, but I do watch and learn from the review comments. That's exactly what I do. I don't really enter club competitions, but I do go to my local camera club, not as regularly as I probably should, but whenever I have the time. And more often than not, there's a competition on, and I do listen to the comments. And I tell you, the reason why I don't enter into competitions is it's really just because I don't have the time to work by those deadlines, you know, very often. And that is really just the one thing that holds me back from that. You know, and then, for instance, if they do things like set subjects, I'm sure it's going to be the same in the US, where you have a specific subject that you shoot and you enter an image based on that, and I just don't have the time to shoot things outside of what I sort of need to shoot, if that makes sense. So I don't really, I'm, in between running the show, having a job and doing a lot of stuff like creating video content and stuff like that for Platypod and all sorts of other things. They're just, unfortunately, there isn't necessarily always the time to create something specifically for a specific subject, which is why the main reason why I don't take part. But I do exactly the same thing when I go to the camera club, and I join the critique. I listen to the judge, and I always learn something without fail. They also always have really good cookies at this particular show. So
usually they do, yeah. And I completely agree with what he said. That one phrase, I trust their critique comments. And that's why I always word it, and I did today, and that is the fastest way to improve your photography is critique from a trusted source, right?
Yeah.
As a concert photographer, that doesn't mean only getting critique from a concert photographer. I may get a critique from Rick Salmon, who doesn't necessarily shoot live music. But I know who he is. I know how he thinks. I trust it. And it's the same when I buy whiskey, right? I watch a lot of whiskey YouTube because I collect whiskey. I've learned who has my flavor palette is the way I describe it.
Yeah.
Right. So if I see, 3 YouTube channels and 2 of them hate this whiskey and 1 of them likes this whiskey, I've learned to know those 2 don't match my taste. The one guy who liked it happens to have the same taste as me. Like they've both said this is a great whiskey before, and I've bought the bottle and hated it. Rarely does that happen with this one odd man out. So I trust the odd man out. That's the key. You've got to learn who sees the world like you do, because they'll still, even if they see it like you, they're still going to see it different than you. If you stick 2 concert photographers in the exact same spot at the exact same time for the exact same concert, they'll take 2 different shots. Inevitably.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So getting that feedback from somebody else is just, it's critical to me. And again, I'm going to go back to Melody, who is, my God, man, such a good photographer. And, I look back now that she came in and she listened to Don and I, and she's a better photographer than I am, but I hopefully managed to see something in her shot that was usable to her, or she knew not to use it or learned not to use it by trying it, going, yeah, Steve's suggestions don't work, but Don's does. Doesn't matter. She thought about it. That's the key. She went through the process, and that will inevitably help, because you're never perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Norman's put another comment down saying that he shoots street photography in black and white, and that doesn't really work in local club competitions. That's true. Certain things don't really work that well in competitions. And the one thing that I've noticed, and I also know this anecdotally, obviously from people who go to a lot of these competitions, is that certain judges have a certain preference for, let's say, landscapes or cityscapes or portraits or whatever, which is incidentally with my local camera club. That's why they don't announce the name of the judge before the competition night, because a lot of people who know these judges would then enter images that they think are in that judge's favor, if that makes sense. So and I hear it very often. This is one of the criticisms that I would have very often is, often when they hold images back, let's say they hold 3 or 4 images back at the end to have another closer look at, by that time, I can usually predict what they're going to choose, because I would have sort of figured out what their preference is. And when you have 2 portraits and 1 landscape image, and I know the guy's obviously into landscapes, he's going to pick that landscape image, over the portraits. And it's just it's just a perfectly human thing, because we all have preferences to a degree.
It's also what we shoot. Like so we categorize, and I would actually argue Norman can be right and not necessarily. I would argue in most local competitions for street photography, black and white street photography, you're probably not doing a ton of post-processing. Enter it in a photojournalism category.
Right.
Because photojournalism categories are seen totally different and have different rules in image competitions. Whereas, other categories, you can do more to the image, but it's also looked at differently, right? So if in photojournalism they're taking a picture of firefighters putting out a fire and there's some person cut in half on the side, yeah, we wish that you had cropped it differently, but there's, or it's too much clutter or whatever, not perfect composition. There's more leeway in that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the moment you're capturing. So there is that ability, but I do agree with what you said. And that is, you can usually predict the judges. For example, for me, when the portrait category comes up, there's a shiver that runs down my spine. I am not a portrait photographer. Same with wedding. I'm not a portrait photographer, but I do know what's wanted in an image comp. So in an image, and that's why I say you can have a brilliant image that will fail drastically in an image comp, right?
Yeah.
People always pick their favorite images, and that's wrong, right? That's what I do, and I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
Image comp is a specific beast you need to pick based on comp. So for example, in a portrait, in an image comp, very specific, the assumption in an image competition for a portrait is that you had full control over the lighting in specifically the portrait category, right? We assume you had full control over the lighting, the scene, the scenario, the posing, everything. And so there's certain things that we don't want to see. For example, I don't want to see somebody turn to the side and have their iris and pupil buried in the internal corner of their eye. I want to see white on both sides of the iris. Now, a lot of portraits, people don't know that. I also prefer to see one catch light because that's natural. If I see two catch lights, that might affect it, right? I also don't want to see you make somebody's skin look like plastic by over softening their skin. Now, we have a joke that if you took a senior portrait of a young high school girl, in image competitions, we award what's called merits if you hit a certain score. And we have a saying, I'm sure that image got you some green merits. The parents of that high school girl love that portrait and they paid you and they're happy and they're sharing it everywhere and they think it's fantastic. It's not going to merit here because I can see your Photoshop work, right? Two completely different things.
Absolutely. And Norman is just saying, noted regarding the photojournalist category. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's entering the right image in the right category is absolutely vital. Because here, otherwise you're literally shooting yourself in the foot. And then as far as the image selection is concerned, that's one of the things I've learned the hard way, is that when it comes to club competitions, is you literally, I mean, a lot of people that I know in the camera club world shoot for competitions, specifically,
and only for competitions, specifically, yes.
And only, yeah. So I teach a studio lighting class once a month. It's like a workshop I do locally, and virtually all the participants are, camera club members and stuff. And one of the reasons they're doing that is because it's an opportunity for them to create imagery that they can use in a competition, further down the road.
See, we don't allow.
Which is cool. Right.
If it's a workshop, we have a workshop category. You can't merit in it, but you can get a critique.
Okay. Oh,
but if you shot it in a workshop, we don't allow it to be entered in the main categories. The reason is you didn't do the work.
Right.
Kirsten got the models. Kirsten got the studio. Kirsten set up the lighting. Kirsten set the ratio on the lighting, right?
Yeah,
so none of that will be allowed because it's not your photo. You took a photo at a workshop. Hope you learned, but that's not your photo to enter. It's not your creation, as it were.
Yeah.
But
it's an interesting thing. Yeah. I mean,
I would just say,
a really good point.
Get critiques somewhere. Get a critique.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I think the way the competitions work on a club level here very often, this is not on an inter-club level. So when clubs compete with other clubs, and sometimes it's just club against club, or sometimes it's region against region. You have these inter-regional competition things. But in a general internal club competition, what happens very often is that there aren't even categories. You have a general, which basically you enter whatever image you want. This could be wildlife image, could be portrait image, could be whatever, and they're all being judged in the same lot, as it were. And then you've got set subjects, where for this particular competition, there was a set subject set months in advance, and then you shoot, people shoot a spec for that. That's very different from sort of interclub competitions where you have categories like portrait or landscape, and then there are rules that apply to wildlife where you're not allowed to do certain things in post-production when it comes to wildlife and this and that, the other. And then you've got creative where, and then of course there's the eternal discussion at the moment about AI, should there be a separate category or what is going on, and stuff like that. So it's, it's an interesting thing. If I don't know, it's, how can I put this? Let's say this politically correct. The club competition world is necessarily a world I feel very comfortable in. Let's put it this way. Generally, and that's just for me personally, because I find, just like Norman said, I think earlier, I find that my style of photography doesn't necessarily work very well in a club competition context. So that's one thing.
Same here.
Same here. And the other thing I think is that I just don't really feel like I want to compete on photography. And so,
which is totally fair.
Yeah, it's completely, and it works for me. And also from a creative perspective, I actually personally I feel that shooting for a competition, or shooting in a competition context, holds me back creatively, and it doesn't allow me to create my own style. And I think that's one of the biggest drawbacks of it, because I could enter 3 heads in a row images all day long, but it'd be the same type of image I'd be entering every week. But that's my style. So the only way you develop something like that.
That's another rule that we have, is we have a rule where if you have a subject, the same subject cannot be used in more than one shot. So you can't. Yeah. We don't have a scenario where somebody takes a set of senior I'm going to use senior portraits again. The high school senior out by the barn, the high school senior in the studio, the high school senior on the railroad tracks. Okay, you got to pick one. Can't use the same subject in multiple shots.
Do you have a specific triptych competition? Because we have that sometimes.
No, we do have a category where composites are allowed. Right. And in composites, we have a different rule, which is, and it's not mandatory, I wish it was, but most people do it. You have the image, and then you have thumbnails of each of the composite pieces down below. So we can see what it was you used, so that we can look at how you combine them together, because at that point now we're looking at your post-processing skill. And again, I have a pretty strict rule. I did something in an image competition about 2 weeks ago that I had never done before. So we scored this image, and it got, I think, like an 83 or something like that, which is a merit. An 80 is a merit. And I was looking at it as I was making a comment, and I went, you know what? I'm going to do a challenge. So a challenge is usually where I'm a 90 and everybody else was an 80. And so the image got like an 82. And you're like, no, this needs to be a 90. I'm challenging. I'm going to explain to you why you're wrong, right? And in this case, I challenged it, and I challenged it to go down. And I said, I'm lowering my score. I don't believe this should be a merit image. And I know the photographer is going to hate me for this, but they need to learn. And, this isn't PPA. This is a local Southern California chapter, right? And you need to understand that when I scored this, I didn't see what I see now. And what I see now are clear, obvious Photoshop tracks. And if I can see your work, I will not merit you. I don't care if you have to zoom in pixel by pixel to get rid of, because you darkened the sky and there's a halo around this, or you darken the sky and in between the bird's feet, I can see the old sky, whatever it is. Or you clone tracks because you clone something and it's very obvious. If I can see it, I can't merit you because that image should not get a merit. It's bad work. You would have been better off to not do the work than do it bad. So either zoom into 400% and go pixel by pixel and fix it and bring it back, or not. But I challenged it down. They all went, every one of them was like, oh, I can't unsee it now.
Yeah, that's the
Right?
thing.
That flaw is in my face now.
Yeah.
And but it has to be said, right? You're there to help people grow. The other one is where people nowadays use Photoshop or whatever, or auto masking in Lightroom to choose the sky, and they do some weird sky effect, and you have a little white line around the mountains. If your sky work leaves a halo, you're not going to get a merit from me. There's no excuse for that, right? You had chromium, like you converted to black and white, but you had chromatic aberration. So you had the sky, you had the mountain, and then you had this purple line of chromatic aberration across the mountain. Well, when you converted to black and white, that went a different color than everything, and I see a halo. Yeah. If I can see a halo, you're not going to get a merit from me.
Yeah. And it's, you said it's all about helping people grow, and I think that's the sort of central, the central thought. And I tell you what, it's totally worthwhile doing a whole live stream just about helping people grow in image competitions. I think that would be a super interesting thing to do. But for today, we've 3 hours later. I think we're going to bring it to a close. It is 10 past midnight over here in the UK. Steve, again, it's been an absolute pleasure. We're going to do these things again. For those of you who are still listening or still watching, thank you so much for coming by. Again, remember you can support the show on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake. Buy us a coffee. That'd be very much appreciated because, well, it would keep me awake. I don't think I'll be awake for very much longer. But again, thank you so much for joining us here today. And we're going to do this again in the not too distant future, maybe on a more or less regular basis. So again, thank you so much. And Norman's just said he's finished editing just in time.
We just kept going until he was done.
Exactly. Cool. Great. So that's it for us, from us for tonight. And we'll see you again next time. Thank you so much. And bye for now.